Chapter 2060. The closer Zhang Yan's clone got to the place where the mana collided, the stronger the resistance in front of him. He had to keep using the Wei on his body to open up a path in order to continue moving forward. The ancestral master's Wei was limitless, and he was not afraid of exhausting it. However, because he was not the owner of the mana and had only borrowed it temporarily, the power was disappearing at every moment and could not last for long. In other words, regardless of whether he used this power to fight against the enemy or not, it was constantly decreasing. In the end, it would all disappear. Therefore, he had to find that existence before this power disappeared completely and fight with him directly instead of letting it be exhausted here. He deduced that the reason why he had been lingering outside for so long without being able to see the owner was perhaps because his power level was slightly lower, so it was difficult for him to break through the final barrier. At this moment, a sword light suddenly appeared in front of him. Like a flash of lightning in the haze, it split open the path in front of him in an instant, and all the obstacles in the surroundings disappeared at once. His heart moved slightly. He knew that it was the Taoist who had helped to guide him, so he did not hesitate. With just one step, he had already entered the battlefield. He looked up and saw that the Taoist was still standing there with his back facing him. He did not turn around. There was nothing in front of him, only the omnipresent malice and darkness that devoured everything. Everything in the world that came into contact with there was no more rotation of life and death, and there were no more collisions of mana. Everything disappeared directly. Behind him was empty, and most of the malice had been weakened. There was a clear boundary between the two. All the power that came pouring over seemed to have been blocked by his own power. Zhang Yan could see that the Wei was constantly expanding. This was not only in terms of power, but also in the divine will. In other words, as long as you saw it, there was no way to escape except to resist. In the end, even cultivators would not be able to sense this power, let alone go up to stop it. They would only be drowned by it. In reality, once this power was displayed, it would lead to the end. The reason why he could still see it was because the Taoist was blocking it. Therefore, this was only the power after it had been suppressed. The Wei possessed by that existence was far more tyrannical than expected. In order to deal with this force, Zhang Yan immediately turned his divine will. Boundless Wei was produced and directly attached to Bu Shuyan. The malicious attack seemed to have hit a solid barrier and was unable to penetrate even an inch. With his back facing him, the Taoist said, "I'll leave this place to you." As soon as he said this, the darkness that swallowed everything was no longer obstructed. In an instant, it passed through all obstructions and surged forward. Zhang Yan could guess what he wanted to do. Just now, this person had torn apart the obstruction for him. Clearly, he had lost some opportunities in the battle. If he wanted to continue fighting, he would need a chance to adjust his breathing, and the gap left here would be filled by him. Only by holding on to this power would he be able to prevent the worlds from being harmed. However, this was also what he wanted. Only then would he be able to see enough things to make up for what he lacked. With a wave of his sleeve and a stroke of his finger, a torrential river was drawn out. Its momentum was endless, and it was completely formed by the Patriarch's mighty power. All the appearances were reflected by his mind, or it could be said that it was a reversal of each other's understanding of their minds. The river surged and directly collided with the malice. The tides surged and the waves behind pushed against the waves in front. It actually completely stopped the malice, making it unable to invade any further. At the same time, many things invaded his mind. This was like seeing the Patriarch's Wei River for the first time. The magic powers collided and fused, allowing him to see the mysteries of the other. At the same time, the other also saw many things. However, his avatar was formed from Bu Shutian's creation Wei and the Patriarch's Wei, so the other couldn't see him directly. At this time, a deep and hollow voice came. Tai Ming. Zhang Yan instantly sensed that a pair of eyes had suddenly turned towards him from the depths of the void. If the frightening malice from before had only affected him, then most of it had been caught by the Taoist. But now, all of it had landed on him. He had faced it twice before, so he had nothing to fear now. From the beginning, his goal was to help the Taoist share some of the pressure. If the Taoist only focused on him, that would be the best. Even if this avatar was destroyed, he could use this opportunity to see more. The rushing river continued to wear down the Taoist. Its power didn't decrease by much, but it was moving away from him. After all, this wasn't his own power, and it wasn't at the same level. The other couldn't directly kill the whaley, but it could disrupt his control so that it didn't belong to him. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before he completely lost control of the river. This situation was within his expectations. Just now, he had already achieved his goal. Moreover, he wasn't alone here. The Taoist had already adjusted himself. His aura grew, and the Fa power that had been suppressed surged again, becoming extremely eye-catching. Zhang Yan was clearly aware in his heart that even though he had managed to catch his breath, it would not be able to change the final outcome of this battle. Fortunately, this had undoubtedly prolonged the battle. Even if he was still defeated, he would have more opportunities. It wasn't difficult for the Taoist to sense that he couldn't hold on for long. He immediately pointed with his finger, and an endless stream of sword light swept across the void. It instantly cut apart the malicious and dark force. However, Zhang Yan did not stop because of this. Now that this body had not truly dissipated, he could still do some more tests. Under the control of his will, long river surging waves rushed down the hole created by the sword light, searching for the source of the malice. However, halfway there, it encountered a great resistance. Then the opened door suddenly closed, and all senses were lost. His eyes flashed. It was a pity that he couldn't go there. Fortunately, he had done what he needed to do. Now, he just needed to wait until this avatar was finished. With him joining the battle, he helped the Taoist bear a lot of the burden. The battle was actually on the same level for a while. However, this was only temporary. When he retreated, everything would return to normal. After fighting for an unknown amount of time, Zhang Yan felt that the patriarch's whaley had become extremely weak. Knowing that the final moment had arrived, he raised his sleeve and bowed to the Taoist. "If I succeed, I will naturally come back to help you." As soon as he finished speaking, his entire clone exploded into pieces, and even the creation energy collapsed along with it. At the same time, Zhang Yan's consciousness returned to his original body. Using Bu Shu Tian as a barrier, he blocked the malicious intent of the divine will outside. However, this was only suppression and couldn't be eliminated. The next time he went out, it would appear again. This was the price he had to pay for facing that existence. Without the patriarch's whaley, he wouldn't go out easily. Once his cultivation reached a certain level, he would naturally be able to resolve it. Just now, in the fight, he had gained a lot. As long as he absorbed all of it, it wouldn't be difficult to make up for the last weakness. However, many of what he saw was fake or even distorted. Just like after he passed the enlightenment stage, what others saw from him wasn't completely real, and he would have to distinguish it himself. But even if it was fake, it must have been derived from the real Xian theory. Otherwise, it wouldn't be enough to make people believe it. After removing the false and retaining the true, he would be able to obtain what he wanted. He focused his mind and entered a meditative state. He deduced and asked himself. He saw the unknown and verified the mysteries of what he saw with the great Tao that Bu Shutian had reflected into his body. After a long time, the understanding was completely established. At this moment, even though he hadn't entered the second realm, he knew everything in advance. It was as if he had experienced it once before. The construction of understanding was divided into seeing and not seeing. If one's body was clear, then it was seeing and not seeing. He believed that the method here was to first use one's own seeing to build enlightenment. Once he reached that realm, he would turn around and solve his own not seeing. This was just like how people who sought help from outside had passed the enlightenment stage. They would be dealt with after they had succeeded. However, in this way, on the surface, it seemed like there would never be a day when the cultivation method would be completed. This was because one was always on the path of success and had never truly reached it. But in reality, this was the most correct path. Even if it wasn't, he had a clear feeling that it was naturally correct. Even if it wasn't the case for others, it was the correct path for him. After understanding all of this, he already knew what he should do. he retreated his mind and separated himself from the various methods. His entire being seemed to retreat into the void. However, because his divine will was still connected to Bushutian, he wouldn't truly enter it. Only here could he see the gap between the realms. If there wasn't the help of the creation Whaley, then he would need to entrust a part of his own Whaley to either a creation fragment or a creation treasure. At the very least, he would need help from someone of the same generation. If there weren't any of these, then he could only rely on his clone. This was also the most dangerous method. Fortunately, he was the master of several creation lands, so he didn't have to worry about this. In an instant, he felt that he had already retreated to the darkness, and he was only a step away from truly entering silence. At this moment, an endless light rose within his divine will, as if he had seen the heart of the land of creation. He knew that this was the result he was seeking, so he immediately let go of the restraint in his mind and allowed the light to shine into his body. Suddenly, the darkness that was already close to him retreated far away as if it was deliberately avoiding him. He slowly opened his eyes. A dim light flickered in his eyes, and it took a while for him to calm down. He looked up at the void and waved his sleeves. Amidst the surging Xian Qi, a voice said, "The heart that avoids all tribulations is in front, the void is always purified, the past and the future are all down, the spirit of the world overflows the sky." Chapter 2061. After Zhang Yan's cultivation had entered the second realm, he immediately sensed it carefully. Because this realm was based on his own knowledge, he already knew all the changes before he entered this realm. The only difference was that he couldn't use it at that time. If a cultivator entered the spirit refinement realm, it could be said that, "All emptiness sees me, I see all emptiness." Then after passing the enlightenment pass, the cultivator pursued, I see emptiness." The most impressive ability here was the ability to avoid the spiritual energy of the same generation and return to where it came from. That day when he wanted to pass the enlightenment pass, the faceless Taoist came out to stop him. He had never understood how this person could escape into the void, or how he could bypass his magic power, and then directly appear in front of him. After building this realm of knowledge and reconciling not seeing and seeing, he understood the real truth here. It was this method that allowed him to avoid his spiritual energy. Fortunately, that person was only an avatar at that time and couldn't use his full strength. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so easy for him to block it. Now, if he met that person again, he could use the same method to respond and wouldn't fall into such a predicament again. Apart from this, the second realm of the spirit refinement realm was different from any other realm. It wasn't like you could solve the problem once and for all with this level of cultivation. You still needed to constantly unravel the unknown. In fact, as long as a cultivator didn't understand the path of cultivation, there would always be unknown things. The higher one's cultivation, the more it was like this. This way, one would always be solving problems and on the path of pursuing the path of cultivation. Based on this, it seemed impossible to go any further. He also didn't know what to do to reach the third realm that might exist. However, his cultivation was based on the ancestral master's technique and the traces of that existence's spiritual energy. He also used the creation Whaley to verify each other. Just now, because every cultivator's path was different, not everyone was like him. Looking at it this way, it would be best if he could find another cultivator who reached the second realm to communicate with. Unfortunately, as far as the eye could see, the only person that could be found in the vast void was probably that Taoist. Those who had reached the second stage were all able to conceal themselves, isolating themselves from everything. This meant that if he cultivated, he could avoid anyone he didn't want to see, and that person wouldn't be able to interfere with what he was doing. If this were to continue, then all traces of him would fade away, and he would completely disappear from the world. Only when he willed it would he be able to appear once more. From the looks of it, those who have reached this realm, even if they don't have a place of fortune, they can use this method to avoid being harmed by that existence. This might also explain why there are so few cultivators who have reached the second gate in the void silence. Zhang Yan thought about it. If that person really couldn't appear, then it was fine. If that person really couldn't appear, then it would be fine. But if that person thought he could avoid that existence's attack, he was just deceiving himself. That existence's spiritual energy was constantly increasing. If no one came out to stop it, it would devour everything. Sooner or later, it would rise to a level where no one could hide. It was impossible to stay out of it. Moreover, even if that person could really avoid it, when that time comes, he would be the only one left. Everything in the outside world, including those who walked the same path as him, wouldn't exist. What was the difference between that and entering eternal silence? Of course, it was also possible that some people couldn't find the place of fortune and could only hide and wait for an opportunity. Or they might be tied down by something and couldn't appear. If it was the latter, then it would be fine. But if it was the former, then this person would just sit and watch the Taoist fight alone without daring to come out. That was undoubtedly a short-sighted move. Zhang Yan raised his head and looked into the void. Now that the spiritual energy of both sides was fluctuating, it meant that the battle was very intense. It was obvious that after receiving his help, the Taoist had slightly turned the tables. It seemed like he could hold on for a long time. Before he officially went out to help, he still had time to make some arrangements. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but think about the sword-shaped item that the Taoist left behind. In the past, he couldn't come into contact with it before he cultivated. Now that he had broken through the barrier, he could take a look at it. At that moment, his spirit turned and entered an unknown place. However, when he looked at it now, he realized that the sword-shaped item was different from before. Instead, it was an extremely long sword gleam that stretched horizontally in front of him. When he tried to sense it, he realized that it was formed by countless tiny sword gleams. They shuttled back and forth and intertwined with each other. No matter how he looked at the details, the image that was reflected was the same. At the same time, countless wonderful theories flowed into his spirit along with the sword gleams. He understood that the Taoist was communicating with him about the Tao. Through these things that appeared, the Taoist was explaining the principles of his sword and even the Tao of the sword to him. Although he was skilled in flying swords, he only saw it as a method to protect himself and didn't focus on it. On the other hand, the Taoist was obviously only using the sword and had deduced this Tao to an extremely high level. At this moment, when he looked at it attentively, he sighed with emotion and felt that he had gained something. However, everyone's Tao path was different, and it was almost the exact opposite. So, he wouldn't imitate the Taoist because of this. Now, he was standing at the same height as the Taoist and could treat him as an equal. After observing for a while, he naturally came to a conclusion in his heart. He pondered for a moment before he similarly stretched out his hand and slashed. A ray of sword light descended as well. In just an instant, countless rays of sword light responded, and he instantly gained something. After this discussion, he noticed that although he could see a lot, the Taoist didn't reveal the source of the Taoist's Tao at all. He understood that this couldn't be casually revealed. However, he could use this as a reference to verify himself. Other than the Taoist Tao, there were many tricks and methods. One of them was a method to refine the sword, and it attracted his attention. After he became a spirit refinement cultivator, he rarely used the flying sword. That was because no matter how great the Qinghong sword pill was, it was refined in the present world, so it was slightly weaker when used in a confrontation with a spirit refinement cultivator. Perhaps if he used his own qi to activate it, he would be able to show off for a while. However, the amount of help he could bring would not be as great as before. Against those who were weaker than him, it was fine. However, against that existence, it would probably be destroyed in an instant. He could use the creation fragment to refine a sword pill, but he could feel that it wasn't what he needed. It might not even be as easy to use as the Qinghong sword pill. However, in this method, it paid particular attention to how to use the land of creation to nurture and refine the flying sword. The mystery of this method was that the cultivator used his own consciousness to visualize the land of creation. It was best if there had never been a treasure of creation born in the land. Then he would pour his consciousness into the land at all times. The essence of this was to divert the treasure of creation that was supposed to be born in the direction of the sword pill. The treasure of creation was completely nurtured by the world itself, but it could also be guided and interfered with. This was something he had never seen before, so there were naturally many tricks to it. He looked at it and was amazed. However, it required the full potential of the land of creation to refine it. If it was done wrongly, what was produced in the end would only be useless. He thought about it. This was actually very difficult. Although he had Busu Tian, and every calendar would nurture a treasure of creation, it was still too far away to wait until the next calendar. Now that he was the master of Busu Tian, if he had enough cultivation, he could try to take it from the future. However, this would be nailing the future variables, and under the premise that the various forces had not been cleaned up, it was not very suitable. Thus, he decided to put this matter aside for the time being. He had to sort out the matters in front of him first. With this thought, he retreated from the will of the spirit and wondered if he should immediately go to help that Taoist. This matter definitely could not be delayed for too long, but he still needed to make some preparations before taking action. This was because if he could not suppress or even repel that existence this time, this battle would definitely be entangled. At that time, he might not be able to retreat as he wished. However, in order to prevent any accidents from happening to Busu Tian, he had to bring everyone with him. The 3 people suppressed inside also needed to be dealt with appropriately. Thus, this matter needed to be carefully planned. After thinking about it, he immediately went to the meeting hall and ordered the formation spirit to send out a talisman to summon everyone to discuss. Not long after, with a burst of spiritual light, everyone arrived in the hall. Even Chen Shu sent a clone here. After the 2 sides finished greeting each other, they took their seats. Zhang Yan said, "I have invited everyone here today because I has already entered the 2nd stage. It is time for me to go out and help that fellow Taoist." Everyone's hearts trembled. They were surprised that Zhang Yan's cultivation had improved greatly, but they were also worried about the upcoming confrontation with that existence. Even though they knew that they would not be able to escape if they did not take the initiative to attack, they still could not help but feel anxious when facing that existence. Taoist Zhen Yuan's expression was solemn as he asked, "When does fellow Taoist plan to take action?" Zhang Yan said, "This matter is very important. I think fellow Taoists need to make sufficient preparations, so I do not plan to take action immediately." Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but feel slightly relieved. At this time, Zhang Yan said, "However, if I and everyone else go out to help that fellow Taoist, then there will be no one to defend Busu Tian. What do you think we should do with Xian Che, Towering Sky, Rindu, and the others?" Taoist Shunchang said, "I believe that fellow Taoist has personally captured these people, so you should also make the decision here." Taoist Qing Sheng said, "I have a question here. I wonder if fellow Taoist can send them into eternal silence right now?" Zhang Yan looked at him and nodded slightly. Everyone was slightly startled. Since Zhang Yan had the means to suppress the 3 of them into eternal silence, it was likely that it wouldn't be difficult for him to deal with them. Even though they knew that Zhang Yan wouldn't do that, and there was no need for him to do so before that existence was defeated, there was still an additional trace of fear in their eyes when they looked at him. Qing Sheng's expression turned cold as he said, "Then fellow Taoist, why don't you take care of these people? That way, when we go out to fight, our path of retreat will be secure." Chapter 2062. When Zhang Yan heard Taoist Qing Sheng's words, he didn't comment on it. He had asked the others when he came down, and they all seemed to listen to his arrangements, so they didn't have any opinion on it. Thus, he said, "I think about it, this person has some ability after all. It's just that it's too much of a waste to suppress him into eternal silence like this. If you're willing to lend a hand, I can make them follow me into eternal silence." A long time ago, he did have the intention to get rid of Tsang Xiao, Rindu, and the others, so as to completely eliminate any future troubles. But now that he thought about it, after he entered the 2nd stage, these few people were no longer a threat to him, so he wasn't afraid of them stirring up any trouble. It was best to make use of them to deal with that existence. However, if he didn't say anything about this matter and directly brought out these few people, it would make everyone suspicious, which wouldn't be beneficial to the battle. Now that he mentioned it, everyone would have an idea of what to do. As expected, after he said that, other than Taoist Qin Xing who didn't say anything, everyone else agreed. After all, it was always good to have more people to share the pressure. As for Zhang Yan being able to suppress these few people, they weren't worried. With his mana, they believed that it wouldn't be hard for him to deal with them. Zhang Yan said, "This battle is of great importance. If anyone has any suggestions, please speak up." Taoist Shunchang thought for a while and said cautiously, "Fellow Taoist cultivation has improved greatly, so I think you're not afraid of that existence anymore. It's just that our mana is far from enough. If we go there, I'm afraid it'll be hard for us to resist. I wonder if fellow Taoist has any way to help me?" What he said was what everyone was thinking. Currently, all of their clones were fighting outside, so they could feel how powerful that existence was. All of them thought that if they were to rely on their own strength, they wouldn't be able to pose any threat to that existence. Instead, they might not be able to protect themselves. Quan Dao and Quan Dao knew this very well. When they tried to escape into Bu Su Heaven to seek protection, they were captured by that existence. They could still remember that there was no way for them to get rid of the malicious intent. They could only watch helplessly as they were trapped. If it wasn't for Zhang Yan coming to rescue them, they would have been forced into eternal silence. They did not want to relive that experience again. Luan Fang cupped his hands and said, "That existence's arcane energy is extremely powerful. Back then, Dao friend Bing Kong and I tried to resist it, but it was useless. We are not afraid of battle, but we are afraid that we will become a burden instead." Zhang Yan looked at the crowd and said, "You don't have to worry about this. If you are in the void, I will naturally use my powers to protect you. Even if you are in danger, I will send you back to the place of creation in time so that you won't be in danger." Actually, even if everyone was trapped by that existence's mana, they would be fine for a while. He could still be like the Taoist and rescue them. One should know that with his current cultivation level, there wasn't an absolute gap between him and that existence. It was just that in the future, it was uncertain. Therefore, now was the time to attack. Everyone was slightly relieved. The reason why they were afraid of that existence was because they were afraid of being forced into eternal silence. Now that there was a way to resolve this matter, the threat was greatly reduced. Zhang Yan gave a few more instructions and said, "Everyone can go back and prepare first. When the time is right, I will naturally summon everyone to attack that person." After everyone bowed, they all left. At this moment, Zhang Yan's gaze shifted and saw that Chen Shu had not left. He asked, "Dao friend, do you have something to say?" Chen Shu bowed and said, "Dao friend, just now, you said that I would protect you. However, I am not at your place of creation. When the time comes, what should I do?" She was different from the rest. She did not stay in the 4 regions of creation. At the same time, she was the master of a place of creation. When the time came, she could only rely on herself. With many fellow Taoists protecting her and Zhang Yan in front of her, it was not difficult for her to return to her original place. However, her hiding place would undoubtedly be exposed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Dao friend, you don't have to worry. When the time comes, I can give you a talisman. When the time comes, it can protect you and retreat to Busha Heaven. This way, you won't have to worry." Chen Shu was finally relieved. She bowed and thanked him. "Thank you, Dao friend." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. After she left, he came to the place where Xian Che and the others were suppressed. With a wave of his sleeve, he moved the Whaley away. Towering Sky and Rin felt their bodies lighten. All the pressure was gone. They were stunned. Then they raised their heads and looked up. They saw Zhang Yan standing there with his sleeves behind his back. His body was shrouded in light and his aura was majestic. The two of them were bewildered. They did not know what he wanted to do. It was difficult for them to see Zhang Yan's current cultivation. However, it was not difficult for them to sense that his aura was deeper than before. However, it seemed to be there but not there. It gave them a feeling of fear. Taoist Xian Che seemed to have guessed something. He remained silent. Zhang Yan looked down and said, "I have already decided to go out and fight that person. Before that, I will not keep you here." Taoist Xian Che frowned. He raised his head and said, "Don't forget what you promised me." Zhang Yan nodded and said, I have a promise with you. I will not break it. When the time comes, you will also need to go to the void with I. Taoist Towering Sky said in a deep voice, Then how are you going to deal with the two of us? Zhang Yan said seriously, As long as the two of you are willing to go with I to suppress that person, I can bring the two of you with me. Ren Du sneered instead and said, But once we arrive in silence, wouldn't we be forced into eternal silence if you stand by idly and do nothing? Zhang Yan said indifferently, If I want to do this, there is no need for me to do so. I only need to expel the two of you from this place. Now that I have come to discuss with you, it is because I value your abilities. He looked at the three of them and said, Even though we were enemies in the past, how can we be compared to the threat of that person? In his opinion, it was a complete waste to use these three people as bait. In fact, even if these people were not on his side, they would still fight against that existence for the sake of their own survival, even if he did not push them from the back. The only difference was whether they were passive or active. Therefore, keeping them alive would be more useful. Ren Du thought for a moment and said abruptly, Then if we repel that person this time, would you be able to let us go out? Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, If you can really do it, you will have done a good deed. I can promise to let you go. However, if you want to live under I's rule, you must abide by I's rules. If you can't defeat that person, I can set an appointment with you. Once you are there, I will release you. Taoist Skirich thought for a while. Zhang Yan should have some confidence in suppressing that person. It was better for him to go with him than to be suppressed here. Moreover, he could see that if he did not agree, Zhang Yan might try to deal with him. So he asked, When will we act? Zhang Yan said, In the next few days. The two of you can make some preparations here. After a pause, he said, This battle is not for I, but for your own. If that person destroys everything, he will not let you go so easily. With that, his figure flickered and disappeared. Taoist Skirich noticed that the creation Whaley was no longer suppressing them. However, he felt that it was still difficult to go outside. There was always a layer of obstruction there. He couldn't help but be shocked by Zhang Yan's control over Bu Shutian's Whaley. Ren Du said coldly, What preparation? Our treasures and creation fragments have all been taken by that person. What do we have to fight against that person? Taoist Skirich shook his head and said, It doesn't matter if we have treasures to protect ourselves when facing that person. It is enough as long as he fulfills his promise. He looked at the silent Taoist Xian Che and said, Fellow Taoist, when did he make the promise with you? Taoist Xian Che glanced at the two of them. He did have the intention to use them earlier, but now that his plan had failed, he was no longer in the mood to deal with them. He said indifferently, The road ahead is complicated. It is hard to know what to do. We should take care of ourselves. After he finished speaking, he ignored the two of them and sat there, silently circulating his cultivation fruit. Ren Du transmitted a message with his divine intent. Xian Che is hiding something. Taoist Skirich pondered for a moment and said, Let's ignore him for now. We'll just keep an eye on him when we get out of the silence. Zhang Yan returned to Qinghuan Palace and casually refined another two treasures, then put them away in his sleeves. However, before he officially started, he still had one more thing to do. He raised his hand and took out the broken mask he obtained from the faceless Taoist. He carefully sensed it. At that time, due to the limitations of his cultivation, he could only trace the karma. Now, it wasn't difficult for him to capture that weak wisp of aura. He followed its direction and his gaze fell on the mirror-like lake. Previously, after he defeated the faceless Taoist, he deliberately looked at this place. All of the karmic connections here were severed, and he thought that this was a place that his fellow Taoists used to hide themselves. At this moment, when he looked at it again, he saw something different from before. Not only that wisp of chi activity and a few weak traces of mana resonated with each other. Looking at it, he found that they were broken masks that floated in different worlds, and they moved in and out with the birth and death of the world. If there was no accident, they should all be the work of the same person. Because there was magic power attached to them, it was possible that as long as it sensed something happening, it would evolve into a magic power doppelganger. He pondered for a moment. According to what the faceless Taoist said that day, The faceless Taoist stopped him from going to the Jejin Pass in order to prevent that existence from entering the world. Now that that existence had appeared, it seemed that there was no need for that existence to stop him again. However, this matter couldn't be viewed in such a simple way. Due to the lack of more clues, it was impossible to see what the person was thinking. He only knew that the person had shown considerable hostility towards him and even tried to obstruct his path. Therefore, as long as that person still had the ability to interfere with him, he couldn't ignore it. This kind of threat had to be removed in advance, so that it wouldn't hinder him in the future. Thinking of this, he immediately willed another Whaley avatar to be born in the silence, and it followed the weak wisp of aura to search for the broken masks. Chapter 2063. Although Zhang Yan's Whaley incarnation was walking in the void, it was not hindered in the slightest. This was because it was easy for a cultivator at the second tier of spirit cultivation to conceal his own magic power, and he could also find the source of the opponent's magic power. Therefore, it was easy for him to avoid the fluctuations of the existence's magic power and directly fell to the target. Even if the faceless Taoist's cultivation was not as good as the current Taoist with the sword, his realm was at least comparable. Now was obviously a good time to suppress that existence. His magic power was here, but he did not show up. No matter what the reason was, he was not on the same side as him. In a flash, he came to the place where the magic power fluctuations were. Looking around, he saw a mask with a missing corner floating in the void. After a glance, when he was about to take it, the mask seemed to sense something. It suddenly turned into an illusory figure. It was the faceless Taoist that he met last time. The person did not seem to expect that Zhang Yan would find his way here. He said in a deep voice, "What are you doing here? Are you still not willing to give up after drawing that existence out?" Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Now I want to lead the people to crusade against that existence. Looking at your behavior, you must have been hostile to that existence before. So what do you plan to do now?" The faceless Taoist said in a deep voice, "It is impossible to suppress and expel that existence. It can only delay the manifestation, but you did not listen to me. You went to the Jejin Pass and finally drew it out. Now it is too late to remedy it. As long as this existence starts to devour everything, it will be unstoppable. If you think you can defeat it with your current cultivation, it is just wishful thinking." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "What I did, even if I can't suppress it, I can delay its invasion of everything. It is better than someone who does not even dare to stop it." Now he also had a rough idea of the existence's origin. If this was really the case, it was indeed difficult to suppress it. But as he said, he could try to delay the battle and prevent it from devouring everything, but not let its strength expand. Moreover, his own cultivation could also be improved. Now that he had the means to stop it, who could say that he could not suppress it in the future? Faceless Taoist, however, did not agree and said, "The results are still the same, all meaningless actions." Zhang Yan said coldly, "Whether it's meaningful or not, it's not up to you to judge. Instead, it's up to the fellow Taoist in the void who dares to stand out and face that person. When that person really overturns everything, are you going to wait for death? Or could it be that you have some sort of countermeasure, but you're unwilling to use it until the very last moment?" Faceless Taoist fell silent. It was unknown whether it was because he only had a doppelganger here and didn't know about this, or he simply didn't want to make it clear. Zhang Yan didn't pursue the matter and directly said, "Since you are not willing to fight with me, then I can only ask you to leave this place." At this point, he raised his sleeve and pointed a finger at the person. Faceless Taoist immediately responded. Layers of magic power spread out from his body, trying to repel the external force. At the same time, his body became extremely faint, as if he was going to hide. However, the next moment, his figure stiffened, and cracks appeared on his body. Then he collapsed in an instant, leaving only the mask there. Last time, it took Zhang Yan a lot of effort to deal with this person, and he even used the Tai golden bead. Just now, he won in the end. But this time, the magic power went straight to the person's root, and how could a sustenance celestial device withstand it? Once it was broken, the magic power stored in it could not be preserved. At this time, he felt that something had appeared in his mind. Although the faceless Taoist's true body was not here, because of the fusion of magic power during the confrontation, he also saw some Xian principle changes, which could also be used to make up for the unknown that he had not seen. He rolled up his sleeve and kept the broken mask, then went to another place where the magic power stopped. Just now, there was also a doppelganger on the mask. After killing it with a similar method, he also kept this mask, and then rushed to the next place. After destroying 4 places in succession, he appeared in front of the last mask. However, this thing seemed to be aware of the approaching danger, so in a flash, it fled somewhere. Zhang Yan's gaze swept over and saw that it was cast towards the mirror lake. He naturally wouldn't allow it to be taken off so easily. The reason he came here was to try his best to get rid of any external forces that could interfere with his cultivation. Even if he missed one, it wouldn't be considered complete. With a thought, the mask froze in an instant. The mana on it dissipated before it could manifest. Then, it was sucked over by him and put into his sleeve. At this time, he turned to look at the mirror lake. Previously, he also noticed that no matter where he went, as long as he followed the weak magic power, he would always be able to see this place in a glance. This meant that the faceless Taoist's magic power was related to this place, and this should also be a place of refuge. Perhaps this person was hiding there at the moment. So after destroying these masks, would the person send out the same thing from the inner room? He thought that the possibility was extremely low. These masks had all been placed outside before the calamity of leaving the sky. The reason why the original owner did this was because he was afraid of that existence. He did not dare to show himself, so he could only use a clone to do things in his place. Therefore, if this person had the guts to come out, it would be a good thing. That existence would not care about the conflict between them. As long as it was a cultivator that appeared in the silence, it would be a target for that existence. However, now was not the time to delve deeper into this place. Since these things that could hinder him were no longer here, it was time to gather strength to deal with that existence. He turned around, and his figure disappeared into the nothingness. In Bu Su Tian, Chen Shu was at Taoist Chenchang's place, seeking advice on cultivation. It was also luck. Recently, everyone had accidentally found a treasure embryo. Chen Shu refined it into her body, and her cultivation had increased a lot. Although she did not have the ability to find treasure embryos like Boy Shunchang, she was not like the latter, who would be extremely sleepy when refining the treasure embryo. She was still no different from usual. However, Chen Shu was still not satisfied. She said, "Cultivation can be improved by relying on the treasure embryo, but I always feel that my state of mind is unstable. It is not good for battle. Do you have any advice for me?" Taoist Shunchang pondered for a while. He raised his hand, and 2 cups of spiritual tea appeared in front of him. He said, "Why don't you have a drink?" Chen Shu glanced at it and picked it up. Taoist Shunchang then said, "Why don't you judge it with your body and then feel it with your heart?" Chen Shu was startled, and she nodded lightly. Then she changed her mind and drank it. She felt refreshed all over her body. She was different from before, and she suddenly thought of something. Taoist Shunchang said, "You asked me about the state of mind. Do you have a way that might be useful?" Chen Shu said with a serious expression, "What is it?" Taoist Shunchang said, "We treasure spirits have never experienced the trials of the path of Tao. Fellow Taoist, you can seal off your own memories and enter the world to be reincarnated. After wandering the world once, you will naturally gain something." Chen Shu thought about it and was puzzled. She said, "Even if I travel the world, it is just a fleeting shadow to me. What is the use of it?" Deity refinement cultivators were beyond the world. The changes in the world were endless, and to them, it was just an illusion. As long as you have this understanding, no matter how much you experience in the world, you might not be able to understand anything when you return. Taoist Shunchang smiled. "Did you drink that cup of tea just now, my friend?" Chen Shu recalled the feeling of just now, and she seemed to have understood something. Taoist Shunchang continued, "As long as you see yourself as a human, then you are a human. Sometimes, you will have a different kind of glory when you lower your status." He wanted Chen Shu to completely immerse herself in the world, and no longer see herself as an almighty that had transcended the world. There was indeed a barrier of the heart that was blocking her way, but if she could not even get past it, how could she talk about subduing her state of mind? Chen Shu thought about it for a long time and said, I am willing to give it a try, but where should I go when I am in the current world? Taoist Shunchang said, fellow Taoist Xianyuan could call us to go to the void at any time. This place is the communication point between the current world and the land of creation, and it is not a good place to go. Fellow Taoist can go to the past world, and you will only need to turn back in an instant. On the other side, Taoist Qing Sheng was currently gathered with Quan Dao, and they were also discussing how to deal with that existence. Quan Dao and Quan Dao had a direct encounter with that existence, and Taoist Qing Sheng thought that it was very important. If others were to say that they had no choice but to fight with that existence because of Zhang Yan's urging, he really wanted to expel or even suppress that existence. It could be said that other than Zhang Yan, he was the most proactive person in this matter. Therefore, he had to figure out the methods of that existence. Even if it was just a superficial part of it, it was better than knowing nothing at all. Luan Fang said with lingering fear, that existence's mana seems to have an innate ability to devour. When we went forward with our mana, we could not stop it at all. Instead, we were devoured by it. Bing Kong said, unfortunately, we did not notice it at first, and our senses were distorted by it. This is the scariest part. If it was not for the fact that we have some foundation, we would not have been able to last until fellow Taoists came to rescue us. Taoist Qing Sheng's expression was solemn. No matter what kind of situation it was extremely difficult to deal with it, especially the latter. Even their senses were distorted, so they could not accurately judge the situation. However, they did not know how far they could go. Otherwise, even though they had more people, they did not have much of an advantage. However, on second thought, not long ago, Zhang Yan's doppelgangers seemed to have gone out to fight with that existence, so he should be clear about the situation here. Presumably, he would be well prepared, so there was no need to think too much about this, as long as he was careful. After thinking about it, he said, this time, fellow Taoist Xianyuan and the fellow Taoist with the sword will share most of the pressure. I'm afraid what we need to do is to suppress and reduce that existence's mana as much as possible. When that time comes, I will need the full support of the two of you. If we can see the profound principles of the great Tao from that existence and improve our cultivation, I will definitely repay you in the future. Quan Dao and Quan Dao nodded in agreement. At this moment, a spiritual talisman suddenly flew over. Taoist Qing Sheng took it and saw it. He stood up and said, fellow Taoist Xianyuan has summoned us. It seems like it is time to go out and fight that existence. Chapter 2064. Taoist Qing Sheng and Quan Dao did not dare to delay. With a change of heart, they arrived at the main hall in an instant. After a while, Taoist Shunchang, Boy Shunchang, Taoist Jianyin, Chen Shu, and the others also arrived. After greeting each other, Taoist Qing Sheng shifted his gaze and looked at Chen Shu's face. The latter's spirit and qi were slightly different from before. It seemed to have undergone a certain degree of transformation. This was not something that could be achieved by swallowing a precious fetus. It should be a breakthrough in the state of mind. However, he only took a glance and no longer looked at her. No matter what she did was only seeking external help. In his opinion, it was a wrong path. Only seeking oneself was the right path, and all those who sought him would be his future opponents. When his cultivation increased, he would find a way to eliminate them. After waiting for about 10 breaths, everyone suddenly felt their qi wavering as if they were in the midst of a turbulent qi wave. They quickly calmed their minds. Then, on the high platform, a vast xian qi surged out of nowhere, and a young Taoist wearing a black robe appeared there. When everyone saw him, they hurriedly greeted him. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. After returning the greeting, he waved his sleeve, and his weili spread out to remove a certain restriction in Busushan. After a while, 3 weili emerged from an unknown place. The 3 of them, Shen Shao, Ren Du, and Xian Che, had already been moved to the main hall. At that moment, the 3 of them looked calm, and it was impossible to tell that they had been imprisoned. Taoist Qing Xing sneered and no longer paid attention to them. Shensheng, Zhanyuan, and the others lowered their eyes and did not look at them at all. Chen Shu, on the other hand, looked at them curiously. She joined late and had never dealt with the three of them. She only heard that the three of them had been suppressed by Zhang Yan. However, at that moment, she realized that none of them were weaker than her, and even Taoist Shen Xiao was far above her. Subconsciously, she looked at Zhang Yan again, and her heart was filled with even more respect. Zhang Yan stood on the stage and looked down. He said slowly, "Ever since that existence appeared, he has been seizing everything and swallowing the essence of creation. He is indeed a great enemy of our generation. If we retreat now and don't think of ways to stop him, when everything is destroyed, there will be nowhere to hide. This time, we should take advantage of the fact that he hasn't finished his work and go out with everyone to attack him." Everyone knew that this matter had to be carried out, so they all responded, "We are willing to follow you." In reality, everyone had doubts in their hearts, but they all knew that Zhang Yan's decision was correct. Regardless of whether it was in the long run or in the short run, it was the most advantageous choice. At this moment, Zhang Yan directed with his mind, and a doppelganger walked out. In the blink of an eye, it landed in the Qinghuan Palace and sat down. This was the doppelganger that he was going to leave behind after he left. Bu Xiutian was undoubtedly the most important. Everyone relied on this place for protection. Even if they failed to achieve their goal this time, as long as this place was still there was still a way out. However, if he left as the master, someone might take advantage of the gap and invade, so he had to make arrangements in advance. This was not to guard against that existence. Although he was not in Bu Xiutian, he could still use the Weili here, so it was almost impossible to invade from the outside. However, he had to pay attention to the strange power that existed in Bu Xiutian. These strange powers could not be completely eliminated, because if that existence was delayed, he would not have the time to care about other places. So, if someone came out to attack Bu Xiutian at this time, although they would not be able to take this place away, it would be difficult for him to send people back safely if there was internal chaos. Moreover, Bu Xiutian was implicated in the present world, and there were also his fellow masters and disciples. They would not be able to resist the invasion of the mighty figures of the spirit refinement realm. In order to prevent such a situation from happening, besides this doppelganger, he also left behind the 2 jade pendants. At a critical moment, he could use the Patriarch's Weili to help. However, if there was an external enemy who activated the strange power, he did not expect to be able to calm it down. As long as he could hinder it a little, he could withdraw in time to deal with the internal problems. Although these things might not really happen, it was always good to be prepared. He solemnly explained some important matters to everyone, then looked up at the void silence. His aura suddenly rose, as if there was no end to it. As his robe fluttered, the 5-colored brilliance behind him rotated, and then he took a step out of Bu Xiutian. Taoist Qing Xing did not hesitate and immediately followed. Taoist Quan Dao and Taoist Qing Sheng followed closely behind. Taoist Chang Dao and the others were not slow either, and they almost followed at the same time. As soon as Zhang Yan entered the void silence, he felt a boundless malice shrouding him, and the other person's gaze also stared at him. This was different from the previous time when he only sent his doppelganger here. Now, he was facing that person directly. With a single thought, the Xian Qi around him suddenly surged and filled the void silence, blocking all the magic power fluctuations that came over. At the same time, behind him, streams of Weili broke through the world and appeared in the void silence one after another. More than 10 mighty figures of the spirit refinement realm appeared at the same time, and their aura was so shocking that even the magic power fluctuations of that existence were pushed away, and could not get close at all. The magic power between these people collided and intertwined, and countless worlds flickered like stars. Since that existence appeared, the gloomy atmosphere of the world immediately changed. Everyone was originally afraid of that existence, but that was because their strength was far inferior, and they felt that they had no chance of winning. However, they only weighed it from their own point of view. Now that everyone stood together, this gathered power was unprecedentedly grand and powerful. Not only that, Zhang Yan alone stood in front of them and blocked most of the attacks, and they immediately realized that there was still a chance of winning this battle. At this time, that existence obviously also sensed the changes here. More than 10 mighty figures of the spirit refinement realm, even if more than 90% of them were not as skilled as him, it was enough to bring a threat to him. Moreover, there was still Zhang Yan and the Taoist who were enough to restrain him. Therefore, his aura paused and he retreated. This was the first time since he appeared that he showed signs of retreating. Seeing this, everyone's confidence increased, but no one rashly attacked, because they all knew their own strength. If there was no Zhang Yan Weili to protect them, once the opponent's magic power came over, they would probably be easily suppressed into the void silence like Quan Dao and the Taoist last time. Zhang Yan knew that if he could mobilize everyone's strength, it was really possible to expel or suppress that existence this time, but the origin of this existence was still questionable. If it was as he thought, even if they could do it this time, it was still possible that not long after, but there was no need to think too much about it now. When that time came, they would think of a way to deal with it. In the depths of the void silence, the Taoist slightly tilted his head. After he received the support of Zhang Yan last time, the situation that was originally suppressed by the opponent was reversed again. At this moment, when he sensed the arrival of Zhang Yan and the others, he slightly took a step back, and then waved his big sleeve, and the sword light suddenly lengthened. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed in front of everyone, and everyone felt a great danger descending. Although they knew that it was not aimed at them, they still felt a wave of fear. As the ray of sword light descended from the silence, it was as if a celestial realm had been drawn out. However, this time, it did not split the two. Instead, it slashed directly into the darkness. It could be said that a huge gap had been torn open in the depths of that existence's mighty power. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. It seemed that the Taoist saw that strong reinforcements had arrived, so he no longer held back and turned to attack with all his strength. Not to mention that this person attacked decisively, his grasp of the opportunity could be said to be perfect, just at the moment when that existence closed in on the Weili. In that case, he should not let this person down. Immediately, with a thought, a golden light flashed, and the tiny golden beads suddenly fell in, immediately stirring up a large part of the malicious darkness. This treasure of fortune was most suitable to be used in such a place. In any case, the surroundings were surrounded by that existence's Weili, so it was suitable no matter where it fell. When Taoist Qing Xing and the others saw this, without waiting for orders, they also attacked together, trying to continue to expand the results of the battle. As everyone fell in the Weili, the void silence that was originally filled with darkness and evil Weili also seemed to be fragmented. Zhang Yan was still cautiously looking at the depths of the void silence. Although he had disturbed that force, it did not reduce the malicious intent in the slightest. It could be seen that just now, the other party was only retreating to better attack, and he had to be wary of the other party's means. Just as he expected, when everyone's mana was surging and advancing triumphantly, they suddenly felt empty. The mana that was pushed forward landed in the void silence, and was continuously swallowed and disintegrated. At the same time, the divine wills also sensed that endless malicious intent was surging, but because they had been warned by Zhang Yan in advance, they did not panic. Zhang Yan could see that this was the other party using a huge amount of mana to disturb everyone's divine wills. Because of the difference in their realms at this moment, except for him and that Taoist, everyone else would probably be affected. He could stop that existence's mana, but he could not expel the divine wills that were affecting everyone. However, since he dared to lead everyone out, he was naturally prepared. With a thought, he also rushed into everyone's divine wills, and twisted their senses to his side. This way, as long as everyone followed his instructions, it would be fine even if they could not sense it correctly. That existence sensed that the impact of the divine will had no effect on the crowd, so he immediately changed his method. The crowd only felt dazed for a moment before they saw Zhang Yan and the Taoist disappear. Only they were left there to face the pressure of the malicious intent. They couldn't help but be shocked. Fortunately, they still remembered Zhang Yan's instructions before they came out, so they knew what was going on. None of them panicked because of this. They all guarded themselves and no longer attacked, only waiting for the result. Seeing that everyone had disappeared, Zhang Yan squinted his eyes. He had expected this to happen. At the second tier of the spirit refinement realm, one would have the ability to hide from the Wei, and only those with similar cultivation levels could see each other. In other words, apart from him and that Taoist, no one else could see them, because they were all repelled. Fortunately, he knew that this also required a portion of mana to be used, which was equivalent to dividing the other party's strength. As long as Xin Chang, Qing Sheng, and the others could persevere, it would be beneficial for both sides. He waved his sleeves, took a step forward, and stood next to the Taoist. Looking at the evil void darkness, he said, "Now, only me and you are left." The Taoist said in a loud voice, "Fellow Taoist and I are enough." Chapter 2065. As soon as the Taoist finished speaking, he saw that the monstrous malice was about to overflow again. He pressed his fingers together, and as his sleeves fluttered, a sword light flashed, and the darkness cracked again. Zhang Yan raised his sleeves, and the profound qi behind him surged, accompanied by the rumbling of divine thunder. This divine thunder was the manifestation of his will, and was not something that his previous divine abilities could compare to. Now, with the sword light opening the way in front and the Tai golden bead repeatedly bombarding it, the result was great. The malice Wei was constantly disintegrated and melted under the bombardment of the thunder light. But he knew in his heart that the battle had only just begun. If he wanted to defeat this opponent, he and the Taoist had to work together to suppress its power and maintain this advantage. When it accumulated to a certain extent, then they could try to expel or suppress it. During this process, they had to maintain a strong enough oppressive force, and there was no room for mistakes. Once the opponent extricated himself from this situation, then they would be forced into a passive position. Under the repeated attacks of the two, the darkness could not recover to its initial strong moment, but at the same time, there seemed to be an invisible limit to the Wei, and no matter how hard they tried, they could not force it below this limit. Zhang Yan realized that this should be the existence's own Wei power, and it was also the reason why it was difficult to deal with, but this did not mean that it had no flaws. As the two sides fought, he gradually figured out the opponent's method. This person did not pay attention to fighting methods, and completely used the bottomless Wei to compete with them. There was nothing wrong with that. If he had reached this level of power, he wouldn't have to resort to any tricks. He could just use his strength to break through the situation. However, this method didn't seem to have any advantage against the Taoist. This person's swordsmanship was sharp, and usually, with a single slash, no matter what method one used, would be broken. Unless one could overwhelm him with pure strength, there was no way to deal with him in a short period of time. Like piling up sand into a tower, one could only squeeze the strength up bit by bit until it was pressed into absolute silence. But now that he had intervened, it had become even more difficult to achieve this. As long as he cooperated well with this comrade of his, he would not give the other side a chance to make a sudden comeback. At this moment, the existence in the battlefield had retreated slightly under the fierce momentum of the two of them, and then another counterattack arrived. Zhang Yan only felt a gust of gloomy coldness surging towards him, as if it wanted to push him into absolute silence. All the Wei that came into contact with it were separated from his body, and could no longer be controlled. This force spread from the outside to the inside, as if it wanted to drag his entire body into it. Due to this person's uniqueness, he didn't rely on any magic tools or magic treasures, but similarly, his Wei had all sorts of divine powers. At this moment, he didn't take out the jade cup and the golden bell to dissolve the magic power. This was because these two magic treasures weren't the Tai golden pearl, and they hadn't fused with his body. If he took them out rashly now, they would only be devoured by the other side, and then become his own. It could be said that, apart from a few magic treasures, the rest of the things that were born in the land of creation were devoured by this person. He turned his mind and stood still. Then, a five-colored brilliance rose from within his celestial qi, and in the blink of an eye, the power disappeared inexplicably. The foundation of his power was still the Taishan true art that he had derived on his own. If the celestial qi was the manifestation of magic power, then the five elements true light was the true divine power of magic power. As for the Taoist, when faced with this power, he merely swept his sword horizontally and didn't dodge at all. He slashed at the place where the magic power was the strongest, and everywhere it passed, the murky Weili shattered. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. He realized that the Weili was actually deliberately targeting him just now, and not much of it was surging toward the Taoist, so it was easily destroyed. If there was no accident, this person was probably trying to force him to hide his magic power. One had to know that if he did so, he would be able to avoid the attack of the Weili, but he would also be forced to retreat from the battle. Although he could return immediately afterward, that moment was enough for the person to do many things, such as suppressing Xin Chang, Qin Sheng, and the others, and completely driving them out of the battle. It was obvious that the person had also realized that he was the key at the moment, and only by defeating him could he continue to deal with the Taoist. Yi Futian snorted coldly in his heart. Since the Taoist was using him as a breakthrough point, he would just have to take it on. The Taoist was originally good at attacking, and now he was the one to bear the burden, so that the person could be freed. The Taoist had obviously realized this as well, and he did not hold back. He simply handed over the task of blocking the person's magic power to Yi Futian, while he himself went on the offensive. Zhang Yan was now facing the pressure of the Taoist's magic power, and he immediately felt that countless mysteries were flashing past his eyes. Previously, he was only here as a doppelganger, and this time he was here in person. The collision of the Taoist's magic power allowed him to see more things. This was not without its benefits. As he continued to unravel the unknown, his cultivation level was also continuously increasing. At this rate, he might be able to catch up to the person. However, he could feel that the person's cultivation level of Taoist's magic power was also increasing. This was probably not from fighting against them, because the person's Weili was higher than the two of them. For such a scene to appear, it must have been nourished from somewhere else. Yi Futian thought about it and he knew where it came from. Although the two of them had blocked most of the existence's Weili, the fluctuation of the Taoist's magic power was everywhere, and there were realms being destroyed by it at every moment. Even the fragments of creation might be found by it, and these alone were enough to become its food. If this was not cut off, then the battle would be even more difficult than imagined. He could not rely on Qin Sheng, Zhan Yuan, and the others here, because they were using all their strength to deal with it. If they were to split their attention, they would only be defeated one by one. Thus, he could only divide a part of his Taoist's magic power to block it. At this moment, on the other side, because everyone was excluded, they could not participate in the battle, and could only fight against the fluctuation of Taoist's magic power. Chen Shu was fighting against the omnipresent malice, and she suddenly thought, if that person won this battle, what would happen to them? She transmitted a message with her divine will. Taoist Chen, how is he now? Taoist Shunchang said, this matter is not a problem. If Taoist Xianyuan cannot defeat this person, we will not be able to stay here peacefully. Even if something goes wrong, we still have Bu Shutian as an escape route. Chen Shu calmed down slightly, but in the next moment, she was shocked. A voice sounded in her mind, if I were you, I would not be at ease at a time like this. Chen Shu was shocked and she said, Shi Liang? The voice replied, yes, it is me. Chen Shu asked curiously, aren't you long gone? The voice said, you are me and I am you. I have always been here, how can I not be here? Chen Shu thought about it, and she became cautious and said, what are you trying to do? The voice said, you do not need to see me as an enemy. You and I have already merged into one, why would I harm you? I am just reminding you not to be too optimistic about this matter. Chen Shu's heart tightened and she said, are you saying that Taoist Xianyuan will lose? The voice said, I do not know whether that person will lose, but regardless of the outcome of this battle, I am afraid that you will not be able to escape from a great disaster. Chen Shu frowned and she said, what do you mean? The voice said, have you ever thought that you are currently floating outside, and that there is no one presiding over the land of creation? If that Taoist Shenyuan allows you to be harmed by that existence, then he can take this place back later. Deity Chen Shu said, that does not make sense. Taoist Xuanyuan's transcendence energy is much greater than mine. If he wanted to take over this place, then there was no need for him to help me earlier. The voice laughed coldly and said, that is because that existence was threatening outside, so he did not dare to make too much of a ruckus. That is why he kept you alive. Now that his transcendence energy is even greater, and he is currently in the void, as long as he gets rid of you, then he can refine the land of creation for himself at any time. At this moment, Qin Shu suddenly said, you are not Xi Liang. When she spoke, she was extremely calm, as if the panic just now had suddenly disappeared. Xi Liang was silent for a moment, and then said, how am I not Xi Liang? With a serious expression, Qin Shu said, you were right earlier. I am Xi Liang and Xi Liang is me. But you are not. If you are him, then you should know that if Taoist Shenyuan really wants to take this land of creation, I am more than willing to give it to him. Because if that existence were to attack this place forcefully, I would not be able to defend it alone. As soon as she said this, she realized that Xi Liang had gone silent. Then, in a daze, she could feel the presence of other people again. However, she was also extremely vigilant. In the past, she might have thought that what happened just now was her own problem, but after the training of her state of mind, she knew very well where her true self was. There must be someone behind this. When she thought of this, she was suddenly shocked. Could it be that existence? Taoist Xinchang sensed that her aura was abnormal and asked, how are you, Taoist? She hesitated for a moment and did not tell the truth. She only said, just now, it seems like someone is trying to influence my mind. Could it be that existence is doing? Taoist Xinchang said, that person doesn't have to do that. From what fellow Taoist Shenyuan has said in the past, that person may not be our only enemy. You should be careful, fellow Taoist. After the reminder, he thought about it and felt that this matter had to be taken seriously. Thus, he tried to entrust a strand of his divine will to the magic power that Zhang Yan used to protect everyone, hoping that the latter would notice this matter. Ever since Zhang Yan entered the second-degree realm, his cultivation level has increased even more. Almost at the same time when Priest Xinchang left his body, he sensed something and immediately deduced and understood the whole story. He thought about it for a moment. On the surface, as long as that existence got rid of Xinchang and the others, he would be able to release a portion of the magical power that was used to restrain him. It was very likely that he had done so. However, the way he did things did not seem to be what that existence would do. When he thought of this, his eyes suddenly became darker. If it wasn't for this person, then he would have to be on guard against other people interfering in the battle. Attention Lamaks 666. Chapter 2066. Zhang Yan could not help but think about the identity of that being. Presently, he was in a battle with that existence, so if someone else were to interfere, then there would be many unpredictable variables. On the surface, that being seemed to have the ability to destroy everything and was the enemy of all living creatures and even the mighty figures with supernatural powers. Even if they were afraid of him and did not dare to confront him, they would not secretly help him. However, the human heart was complicated, and the world was never so simple to distinguish. Perhaps some people thought that they could use this being to achieve some purpose, or perhaps some did not want to see this being expelled or suppressed by them. This guess wasn't completely baseless. Before this person arrived, many of the fellow Taoists had foreseen this calamity. Other than those who were passive and defensive, most of them would definitely be prepared for it. If his actions today were to obstruct this person's arrangements, then it was possible that such a thing would happen. If that person succeeded, then Xinchang, Qing Sheng, and the others would most likely be defeated one by one. Because they had the protection of his mighty power, they would not be wiped out in one fell swoop. However, that person would be able to release the mana that was originally restrained here and then pour it onto him and the Taoist. Not only that, this being was very sinister. This being was not afraid of his whereabouts being known, because this would force him to divert part of his energy for defense, and he could not use all his energy to deal with that being. Therefore, regardless of whether he succeeded or not, he had achieved his purpose. He snorted coldly. If he wanted to make an issue out of this, he would have made a mistake. After experiencing the incident with the faceless Taoist, he had never ignored threats from other places. If not, the power of the supernatural power that he used to attack now would not be limited to what was shown in front of him. The Taoist seemed to have noticed something and said, "Why are you distracted, Taoist friend?" Zhang Yan did not hide anything and told him the truth. "There is a sneaky person secretly disturbing the hearts of my fellow Taoists. It seems that he is trying to disrupt this battle." The Taoist said loudly, "Don't worry about it. No matter how many tricks he has, I will cut him down with my sword." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Right now, the enemy in front of him was the most important. As long as he could repel that existence, all schemes and sneaky schemes would be useless. It seemed that the person hiding in the dark could only be activated through divine will. He should be afraid of that existence, so he did not dare to reveal himself. If it was just a disturbance of the divine will, he had already instructed them beforehand that as long as they did not panic, there would be no loopholes to be found. Even if there was a chance, he still had a backup plan. Taoist Xian Che was dealing with the fluctuations of dermic powers when a voice suddenly sounded in his heart. "Fellow Taoist, are you willing?" He frowned and said, "Who's talking here?" The voice said, "Fellow Taoist, you were originally a disciple of the great underworld founding ancestor, and you should be in charge of the sect and the place of fortune. Yet now, you've been suppressed by others to the point of being unable to raise your head, and even that place of fortune has been taken away. So, may I ask you if you're really willing to accept this?" Taoist Xian Che said indifferently, "What are you trying to say?" The voice said, "How can that existence be defeated so easily? In my opinion, why don't you take advantage of the fact that the others are still busy and return to the land of creation to regain control of this place? That way, even Taoist Xianyuan won't be able to do anything to you. Once these people are defeated, they can only rely on you. That way, they won't lose control of this place." Taoist Xian Che frowned and said, "Who are you? Where did you learn about these things?" The voice said, "Fellow Taoist, don't ask me who I am. Just think about whether my words make sense." Taoist Xian Che sneered and said, "How dare a coward like you talk to me? Do I need you to teach me what I want to do?" With a single thought, he directly erased the abnormality from his divine will. As for what the other party said, he did not take it to heart at all. It was not that he had not thought of doing so, but he knew very well that he did not have the chance to do so now. At the beginning, he was confident that he could take back the place of fortune from Taoist Skysplit because he could use the founding ancestors' Weili. However, Zhang Yan was also a descendant of the great underworld founding ancestor. Since he had become the master, it was impossible for him to do so. Of course, if Zhang Yan was defeated or suppressed by that existence, then it would be a different matter. At the very least, he would not take the risk before such a thing happened. At the same time, someone in Taoist Skysplit's divine will was also trying to bewitch him. He smiled faintly and did not take it seriously. Although his cultivation was the highest in Zhang Yan's absence, he also understood that it was impossible for Zhang Yan not to be wary of them. He must have made arrangements. Even if the place of fortune really changed its master, it would not be his turn. If he retreated now, not only would he not get any benefits, but when Zhang Yan returned, he would be used to establish his dominance. As for whether Zhang Yan would return or not, he did not think about it at all. With the creation Weili protecting him, he would have a way out no matter what. It was impossible for him to fall to such a state. At this time, he suddenly thought of something and asked Rindu. He wanted to remind Rindu not to act foolishly if someone was trying to tempt him. However, when he asked, he realized that Rindu was not disturbed at all. He could not help but laugh. It was obvious that the person who was playing tricks did not take Rindu seriously and did not think that he could succeed, so he did not spend any effort on Rindu. However, it was not the same for the others. He thought for a while and told Xun Chang and Qing Sheng about the strange situation. He did not do it out of kindness, but purely for self-protection. If he deliberately did not say it, Zhang Yan might find an excuse to cause trouble for him after he found out, so it was better for him to be more open. After Zhang Yan spread his mana, it did not take long for the existence's mana to rise to be somewhat suppressed. However, because the existence still had a bottom line that could not be broken through, no matter what they achieved, they could not completely get rid of the existence. As long as they waited for the existence to recover, they could still find a way to turn the situation around. As such, the battle slowly fell into a stalemate. There was no doubt that it depended on who could find the place to break through first. If the existence could bypass the obstruction of his mana and find the fragment of creation, then the power of the existence's supernatural power would increase because of it. However, as the person who intercepted the existence, he would always be on the passive side. It did not seem to be a problem in the short term, but if this continued for a long time, there was a possibility that he would fail. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "If this continues, it will be difficult to defeat this person. If it is possible, we should find a way to break out of this situation." The Taoist pondered for a moment and said, "I have a sword that can cut off his foundation and cause him to fall. I just need fellow Taoists to cover me up a little. After that, I will only have an instant to defeat the enemy. If fellow Taoist agrees, I will use this sword." When Zhang Yan heard his words, he felt a sword will penetrate into his spirit will. With just a glance, he immediately understood the profoundness behind it. This sword was indeed, as the Taoist said, its power was extraordinary. Even if it was that existence, if he was hit by this sword, he would not be able to recover in a short period of time. The power here depended on how much the owner of the sword was willing to pay. If the Taoist was willing to enter eternal silence and put himself in this sword, the power would be unimaginably great. The Taoist meant that if he really had to do this, he would not hesitate to use this sword. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. This method was too radical. If the one he was facing this time was just a powerful fellow Taoist, then this method could be tried, but that existence could not be judged by common sense. It was not a good choice to bet everything on this one throw. In fact, even if they did not fight well this time and could not expel or suppress this existence, as long as they could still maintain the situation before them, then they still had a chance. If this Taoist was not here, then it was almost impossible for him to stop this existence by himself. Moreover, there were outsiders watching. If he did not care about anything and used all his methods, if he could not win, then in the end, everyone on his side would die together. This was not worth it. Thinking about this, he said, "I think that this method cannot be used for now." The Taoist said, "I understand what you mean." Zhang Yan turned his gaze and glanced at the darkness. He said, "Although I can't start from here, based on your sword will just now, I can deduce a sword that can kill it and swallow the power of the world." Even if he could not completely destroy the existence, it did not mean that he could not reduce it. Now, his mana was spread out in all directions to prevent the existence from swallowing the world, but he was still in a passive position. Now that he saw the Taoist's sword technique, he thought that he could use this to stop it. The Taoist commented, "The gains do not make up for the losses." Although the existence had swallowed a lot of the power of the world, it did not play a decisive role in the battle. Moreover, no matter how Zhang Yan deduced, to slash out this sword, the price to pay might not be small. Moreover, it did not have a suitable sword in hand, so the effect it could play was extremely limited. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I don't really expect this sword to succeed, but once the sword qi is entangled with the qi, it will not be difficult to see the movement of its mana. This way, it will not be difficult to stop its mana from invading the world." The most troublesome thing now is that the existence's mana is fluctuating. Even if he went to the realm with the fragment of creation, he would not know if he did not deduce it. However, if this sword technique was completed, he would be able to see it clearly. The Taoist sighed and said, "If my sword can kill, then thy sword can transform." From his words, Zhang Yan seemed to be talking about the difference between killing sword and transforming sword, but in reality, it was just that they emphasized different aspects. Because when one's cultivation reached such a realm, the difference was only in Tao and not in the specific techniques. His mind changed. The sword artifact that he was using here definitely couldn't be transformed by the creation fragment. If he did that, it would only be devoured by the other party. Only the Qinghong sword pill was suitable. It was just that this sword couldn't withstand his mighty power now, so he needed to use the creation mighty power to slightly protect it. Therefore, he took a portion of the creation Whaley and immediately poured it into this sword pill. When it had accumulated enough, he raised his finger and pointed. A ray of sword light rushed out and suddenly turned into thousands of stars, slashing into the darkness. Chapter 2067. When Zhang Yan's sword slashed down, he felt as if he had collided with a thick barrier. He knew that this was because that existence had already sensed it when he was about to sacrifice his sword, so its fatally resisted on its own. However, it was useless. The theory behind the sword came from that Taoist, and it could be said to be extremely profound. Moreover, he didn't pursue the power of the sword at all. He merely wanted to peek at the distribution of mana. The more intense the opponent's attack was, the more it suited his intentions. The countless sword lights collided with the mana and touched it. In an instant, he felt that the wonders of the person's mana circulation were all displayed before his eyes. Seeing that he had achieved his goal, he summoned with his mind, and a spiritual light fell back into his consciousness. The Qinghong sword pill had already turned back. At that moment, he took a look and saw that there were many cracks on the sword pill. It looked as if it could shatter at any time, and it was only relying on a sliver of the Whaley of creation to maintain itself. He knew that this was because its foundation was still a little shallow, and it couldn't withstand the collision of the two Whaley. Just now, this slash was still a little forceful. This sword had achieved countless results by his side back then, but now, it couldn't keep up with his footsteps. Luckily, he had already obtained the method to refine the sword, so it wouldn't be hidden here. There would still be a day where it could show its might again. Thinking about this, his consciousness changed and he stored it away properly. He planned to wait for this matter to come to an end before going back to nurture it. The development of the situation proved that his sword had succeeded in the end. No matter where that existence's mana fluctuations were going to devour, he would be able to see through them in advance, and he would be able to kill and obstruct the existence's path halfway. Without devouring external power to replenish itself, the expansion of the existence's mana gradually slowed down. On the other hand, on Zhang Yan's side, due to the collision and fusion of the two sides, he was able to improve. The gap between the two sides was gradually shrinking, and this caused the situation to change greatly. Zhang Yan felt that if this continued, even if he couldn't get rid of this existence, it would be much easier to deal with it later. However, he didn't let his guard down because of this. He didn't think that the opponent only had this little trick up his sleeves. Right at this moment, he felt that the mana on the opposite side had some abnormalities, as if there was a possibility of it stopping at a certain place. Instantly, he became alert. Such a situation meant that there might be a fragment of fortune there, and it might even be a place of fortune. If this item were to be swallowed by that existence, its FA would definitely skyrocket. Then all their previous efforts would be in vain. So, he absolutely could not let it get it easily. He immediately turned his FA around and faced it with the intention of stopping it. Under the control of his will, the two sides of magic power instantly collided, but the remaining magic power still seeped into the real world. However, this was not a problem. What he was most afraid of was that the other party would take away the good fortune fragment without him noticing. As long as he guaranteed that his magic power would also fall there, then it would be fine. When that time came, they would both have their true bodies, and it would depend on the means of their respective incarnations. It was a pity that he couldn't call that Taoist to help him now. That person's magic power was unique and exclusive. Unless it was necessary, he wouldn't release a single bit of it when he was fighting against an enemy with all his strength. Now that he was here to stop it, he naturally wouldn't come and join in the fun. As soon as his magic power rippled into the world, a magic power clone immediately appeared. With a slight sense, he suddenly found that the good fortune fragment this time looked no less inferior to the good fortune essence he found last time. This was extremely rare, so he definitely couldn't let that person get it. Otherwise, his strength would definitely increase by a lot. However, at this moment, he felt that there was another type of magic power existing in this world. After a slight deduction, he believed that this world should have been taken care of by a fellow Taoist, but for some reason, that person didn't take away the good fortune fragment. However, that person didn't seem to have the intention to fight against that existence, so this matter still needed him to do it. In the next moment, he had already sensed the existence's location. With a thought, he was already in front of that person, and he saw a blurry Taoist standing there. His clone had a few experiences fighting against this person, and his current cultivation was not much weaker than the other party, so he wasn't afraid at all. He unreservedly poured his own magic power into it, and in an instant, they collided. After the magic power passed, he used the Busha Heaven's good fortune Whaley to suppress it. That existence couldn't block it, and his figure became faint. However, the true body's magic power came from the void endlessly, and it didn't dissipate for a while. However, in the end, that person couldn't do anything else. As the two of them collided, the present world suffered damage and countless worlds were shattered. However, at this moment, the person who was originally watching suddenly made a move. A wave of Whaley rose, and it slightly protected the few remaining worlds. Zhang Yan took a slight look and found that this person was only a clone, and he was lethargic. This appearance was extremely like the true body had already entered eternal silence. Although he didn't know why the fragment was left here, as long as it was here, it wouldn't be a trap after all. Thus, he created a will clone, and immediately appeared in front of that person. He raised his eyes, and he saw a thin and small Daoran, who was like a dead log, sitting there with his body curled up. He cupped his hands and said, "Sorry to disturb you, fellow Taoist." That Daoran raised his eyelids weakly, and he slightly raised his hand to return the greeting. Zhang Yan looked into the distance and said, "Fellow Taoist should also know who the person who entered the world at this time is. That person is here for the good fortune fragment. I believe you should also know that." A faint light appeared in the eyes of that Daoran, and he said, "Then why did you come here, fellow Taoist? Don't tell me it's only to stop that person?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I don't need this thing. If fellow Taoist can take this good fortune fragment away, that would be for the best. I will naturally stall that person." That Daoran shook his head and said, "This thing has its own fate. Daoran is only here to guard it, and I won't take it away." Zhang Yan asked seriously, "If I can't stop that person, then can fellow Taoist guard this place?" If this person was confident that he could defend it, then he could ignore the remnant of good fortune. That Daoran said honestly, "That person is powerful in the Whaley, and I can't stop him. However, if worse comes to worst, I can just disperse this world and let this good fortune fragment fall into another world." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, "Then how about this? I have a good fortune land that can protect people of the same generation. Why don't fellow Taoists take this good fortune fragment and temporarily stay at I's place? After that person is expelled or suppressed, fellow Taoist can go find that fated person. What do you think?" The Taoist shook his head and said, "Fellow Taoist, you seem sincere, but I can't believe you. Forgive me, Daoran, for not knowing how to appreciate kindness." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He had the good fortune land of the four royals, so he didn't care too much about the good fortune fragment. Normally, he didn't have to obtain it, but this time, if he didn't take this good fortune fragment away, there would be no end to the matters here. This person could indeed disperse the good fortune land, but if the good fortune fragment didn't appear here, then it would appear somewhere else. However, this matter was full of uncertainties, and he might not be able to find it easily next time. Since he couldn't persuade him, he could only use his own method. He said, "If that's the case, then I can only offend you." That Daoran chuckled and said mockingly, "At the end of the day, you still want to snatch it. However, you're currently fighting with that person, so I'm afraid you won't be able to divert much of your strength to me." Zhang Yan didn't say anything more to him. He glanced at him indifferently and turned to leave. That Daoran was stunned, but since Zhang Yan didn't come to fight him, he was happy to do so. He only protected a few domains and didn't care about anything else. At this moment, Zhang Yan transmitted his will to his main body. In just an instant, the Qinghong sword pill flew over out of thin air and entered this good fortune land. Since that Daoren didn't allow him to take this item and didn't even touch it himself, then he must be abiding by some kind of rule. Since that was the case, he would sacrifice the sword pill into this good fortune land and make this good fortune land a resource to strengthen its foundation. In the future, he would put it into Bu Su Tian to be nurtured. As he operated the sacrificial refinement method, the good fortune essence in the good fortune land was slowly stripped out and merged into the Qinghong sword pill. In a short while, a faint clear light passed through the good fortune land and seeped into the silence. For a moment, it seemed to be between the two. At this moment, that Taoist discovered what he was doing, and he was instantly shocked and angry. How could he have thought that Zhang Yan didn't even need to take the good fortune essence from the good fortune land? He instinctively wanted to go out and stop him, but at this moment he thought of something. After his expression changed several times, he sat down dejectedly. With a shake of qi, Zhang Yan's consciousness incarnation appeared in front of that Taoist again. He said with his sleeves behind his back, "Today is just the situation, I have no choice but to do this. I still have a good fortune land fragment in my hand, and it's not inferior to the one behind fellow Taoist. If fellow Taoist sees that fated person in the future, you might as well bring him to find me." As he spoke, a talisman that looked like a golden leaf floated in front of him and landed in front of that Taoist. That Daoren sighed and shook his head, saying, "Just now, it's Daoren who's persistent. Actually, Daoren also knows that I can't guard this place, so there's no need to find any fated person. Since the good fortune land fragment is used by fellow Taoist today, then fellow Taoist should be that fated person, and I, Daoren, should also be free." He stood up and made a bow, and his body actually slowly dissipated. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised, but combined it with his words and made a slight deduction. He couldn't help but understand. This Daoren should have been ordered to wait for the fated person here before his main body went into silence, and the main body seemed to have made some arrangements. When the fated person arrived, this avatar would disappear. Because he knew this reason, he never wanted the so-called fated person to appear. He said that he was guarding this place, but in fact he also had a selfish motive. As the good fortune essence was swallowed by the sword pill, this world naturally had no attraction to that existence, and the magic power was no longer sent here. And that avatar of magic power, without the support of backup, also completely dissipated under the attack of Zhang Yan's good fortune Weili. At this moment, Zhang Yan's main body sensed something, and with a wave of his hand, the Qinghong sword pill had already fallen into his palm. The cracks that were originally densely covered on it had already disappeared, and only a deep clear light formed by the good fortune essence was faintly circulating on it. Chapter 2068. That Taoist sensed the sword pellet in Zhang Yan's hand and said, "Fellow Taoist, can I have a look at your sword?" Zhang Yan knew that he definitely had some pointers, so he flicked his finger and sent the Qinghong sword pellet over. That Taoist still didn't turn around and looked sideways. He said, "From what I see, there's no need for this sword to hide its god intent. Fellow Taoist can use it now." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised and said, "From what I see, fellow Taoist seems to have refined the sword pellet to this extent, but it's still not enough. It needs to be placed in the land of creation and nurtured repeatedly before it can be used." That Taoist said, "That's true. This sword's foundation has already been built. If you want to connect the spirit and enter the intent, there's nothing more than to continue nurturing it. However, everyone's method of operating and cultivating is different. Fellow Taoist's sword doesn't need to be immersed in the land of creation. Fellow Taoist has several such lands behind you and can mobilize many Weili. The resources are already sufficient, but you can use that person's mana to polish the edge of the sword during battle. This is a rare opportunity, so don't miss it." Zhang Yan listened and seemed to be deep in thought. He deduced in his heart and felt that this was indeed feasible. However, the difficulty wasn't small. If he was careless, the sword pellet could shatter during battle. If that happened, the sword would never be able to be restored. Even if he wanted to revert it, It wouldn't be the original one anymore. However, compared to nurturing it step by step for a long period of time, polishing it during battle was indeed what he wanted the most. However, if he wanted to fight the enemy, even if he had a sword in his hand, he still needed a matching sword skill. In the past, those sword skills were only techniques of the current world and were useless here. Therefore, he needed to deduce another set of techniques. Once he thought of it, he immediately put it into action. His spirit intent rose, and in a split second, he had already gained something in his mind. Regardless of whether it was a sword technique or a sword weapon, no matter how perfect his deductions were, as long as he had not fought with them, there would always be flaws. At this moment, he could borrow the strength of his opponent to verify his deductions. He immediately poured the mighty power of creation into the Qinghong sword pill. Then with a wave of his sleeve, the sword pill was pushed by his mana and fell into the endless darkness. When it reached the inside, it was like entering a swamp. At first, there was no reaction, but after a while, there was a five-colored true light blossoming. Wherever the light reached, the haze was all gone, the turbid was gone, and the clear was born. It was as if the thick veil was forcefully torn apart. His swordsmanship revolved in harmony with his own cultivation. It was not that the sword was the master, but it was secondary. What exerted its function was still his own cultivation technique, but the sword was the carrier. With the two complementing each other, the circulation of the cultivation technique was smoother, and the edge of the sword was sharper. At this moment, the boundless malice squirmed and filled up the gap that was slashed open. Not only that, a repulsive force was born and expelled the Qinghong sword pill. Zhang Yan was not bothered. After all, the sword pill was not completed and its foundation was still very weak. Just like what the Taoist said, it still needed to continue polishing. Therefore, he did not hope to defeat the enemy. As long as it could survive in this battle, his efforts would not be in vain. After splitting a part of his attention to watch over this place, he turned his main attention back to the battle. Although the creation fragment was not taken by the other party this time, it did not mean that he could rest easy. That existence could still search for such items everywhere. Therefore, he needed to block it every time. Just now, he could stop it from swallowing it. That Taoist only cared about attacking, so he was mainly responsible for the defense. However, after he repeatedly stopped the other party from invading the present world, that existence kept pressuring him. However, this did not affect him at all. Because other than his own mana, he still had the creation Weili as his shield. No matter what, the other party could not take him down in one go. If he could do that, he would not be in a stalemate until now. If that existence was willing to continue this stalemate, he would be happy to oblige. The current battle situation was beneficial to his side. The more stable it was, the less variables there would be. When his cultivation caught up, he could join forces with that Taoist and try to suppress this existence by force. However, that existence kept pressuring him and realized that Zhang Yan's defense was unusually stable. It also knew that it would be difficult to break through here, so it did not waste its energy on him anymore. Not only that, it allowed their mana to wreak havoc. This was because Zhang Yan and that Taoist could only disturb its mana and could not completely destroy it. Therefore, the outcome would be the same whether it was maintained or not. That existence stopped here, but put the pressure on Qing Sheng and the rest. They were not Zhang Yan. The creation Weili was extremely limited. Once they were obviously targeted, they immediately felt that they could not bear it. They hurriedly sent their divine wills to inform Zhang Yan of the situation here. After Zhang Yan sensed it, he made some calculations in his heart and immediately understood the current situation. In reality, there was no need for everyone to panic at this moment because the mighty power of that existence had been continuously destroyed by them. In reality, it was unable to mobilize too much of its Fa Li. However, because it was blocked by the Fa Li, everyone did not know what was going on. They were afraid that if this dragged on for too long, another variable would appear. Thus, they needed to think of another method. Just as he was thinking, that Taoist said, "The opportunity is here." Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat and he said, "I wonder what opportunity you are talking about." The Taoist said, I have a method that can cut off part of that existence's mana and allow it to be reborn alone. This way, this existence will no longer be alone. When Zhang Yan heard this, his eyes flickered. He calculated in his heart and could not help but nod. If it was really possible, then it was indeed a good idea. Since I can't suppress and expel you, then I might as well divide you. Moreover, the advantage here was that after that existence was divided, each person would naturally have a different temperament. Because both of them could swallow the other, the possibility of them being of one mind was extremely small. Instead, the possibility of them fighting each other was higher. This method did not need to completely destroy the other, and at the same time, it could make them fight among themselves. It could be said to be extremely ingenious and also the most practical method. Presumably, this was the Taoist's original plan. He thought again and raised his head, saying, "This is very worth doing. However, if I do this, the threat to him is not small. I'm afraid that he will sense it in advance and avoid it. I wonder, how do you plan to solve this matter?" Although they were speaking in the divine will and had not put it into action, but with this thought, that existence should have some reaction. The Taoist said, "In order to prevent him from sensing it, I have already buried this thought. Only when the time is right will it appear in his heart. Now that his mana and chi activity are at the bottom, my previous plan can be activated." Zhang Yan asked, "Fellow Taoist, what do you plan to do?" The Taoist said, "This method needs to accumulate strength. Originally, I could barely do it alone and there might be a lot of risk. However, with fellow Taoist here, I have a lot more confidence." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. This was exactly what he was doing right now. He had to assist from the side to restrain the enemy. The Taoist continued, "According to the current situation, I should swing my sword 3 times. The first sword will lock the heaven's secret, the second sword will cut off his spirit, and the third sword will arrive first. This way, I can end this situation." As he spoke, he broadcasted the sword will and let Zhang Yan watch. Zhang Yan observed it and couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Moreover, the 3 swords were integrated into one, and each sword was indispensable. He nodded and said, "I will do my best to cooperate with fellow Taoist in this matter." After the Taoist finished explaining, he did not say anything unnecessary. He very straightforwardly held his sword horizontally, and a sword light suddenly grew. Zhang Yan knew that not only did he have to defend, but he also had to think of ways to attack. However, this would inevitably increase the pressure on Xin Chang and Qin Sheng. If this person could not hold on first, then they might not be able to complete the task. When he brought everyone here, it was only to share some of the pressure with him. He did not expect that this person could play such an important role. At this moment, he did not plan to hold back anymore. With a thought, he left the Busha Heaven's creation Weili untouched, and moved all the other 3 Weili from the other 3 places of creation into the darkness. As long as they gave enough pressure, the existence would definitely not ignore their actions when it sensed the threat. As expected, this time, the existence did not ignore them. The Weili surged again, and boundless malice tightly wrapped around the 2 of them. The Taoist did not care about this, and only focused on accumulating his sword aura. After a long time, a bright light suddenly appeared on his body, and he swung his sword. At this moment, the life and death of the surrounding world seemed to have frozen, and the heaven's secret was instantly broken. At this moment, Zhang Yan thought about it, and with a wave of his sleeve, he also took out a sword. The purpose of the Taoist's sword was to prevent the existence from responding to the warning signs in time, and at the same time, to prevent outsiders from causing trouble. His sword weaved an illusory heaven's secret, and it did not need to deceive the existence. It only needed to confuse it for a moment. After the Taoist swung his sword, the aura on his body rose, and he did not stop, and he swung his sword a second time. This sword was silent, and after it fell, nothing happened. Before he swung his sword for the 3rd time, the existence had already sensed it, and the boundless pressure crazily surged. Zhang Yan knew that from this moment on, the existence would definitely be fully on guard, and would not give them any chance. However, the key was still the 3rd sword, and this sword could not be blocked. This sword was, when the heart moves, the sword will return, which meant that karma is before the cause. This was something that the opponent could not avoid no matter what. Because they were both mighty cultivators of the spirit refinement realm, under the collision of their mana, if only this sword was used, the power would be extremely limited. Therefore, the purpose of this sword was not to hurt, but to trigger the power left behind by the second sword. But if this sword was not used, then the result of the second sword would never appear. After Zhang Yan saw the sword will, he knew very well that the reason why the Taoist did not activate it now should be because he wanted to weaken the opponent's chi activity by a layer before activating it. In this way, there might be more than one or two Taoists that would be slashed out in the end. And the more Taoists were split, the less power they would have, and the damage they would cause would be correspondingly weaker. Chapter 2069. Just now, the heavenly secrets had been severed. Even if it was only for a moment, coupled with Zhang Yan's deliberate confusion, that existence could no longer calculate where the real threat was. However, it was not difficult for him to sense that a great danger was hanging over his head and that it could fall at any time. But in his view, this threat came from those who were his enemies, so as long as he suppressed this person, he would be able to resolve the crisis in front of him. Therefore, his magic power, which was already like a raging wave, suddenly increased by a notch. Behind Zhang Yan, the profound qi was rolling, and the five-colored qi light was rotating non-stop. He also continuously mobilized the creation Weili to resist the omnipresent impact of the magic power. Although that being wanted to suppress the two of them, the situation that he had abandoned earlier was not something that could be recovered in a hurry. Therefore, not only did he fail to achieve his goal, but he was also forced to retreat under the Taoist's sword light. His power could not be gathered at one point. Zhang Yan took advantage of the collision of their magic power to repeatedly polish the Qinghong sword pill. He knew that there would not be many opportunities like this in the future. If he went back to nurture it, he did not know how much effort it would take. Now, it was equivalent to using the other party to refine it. However, he was the only one who could use this method. During this process, he needed to maintain the creation Weili. Just now, there would be no problem. As the master of the four places of creation, he did not need to worry about this. While they were colliding, Shen Chang, Qing Sheng, and the others suddenly felt the pressure suddenly decrease, and the defense that was on the verge of collapse actually stabilized again. Taoist Zhang Yun calculated for a while and said, "This must be because Taoist Xian Yuan heard our call, so he took over the heavy pressure." Taoist Qing Sheng silently sensed and said, "Not only that, did you not notice that this person's qi is very different from just now?" Everyone nodded their heads in succession. Since the start of the battle, that existence's aura had been constantly rising. However, not long ago, it had already stabilized. It was just that everyone had been suppressed too tightly earlier, so they had noticed this, but they did not have the time to think too much about it. Now that they had observed it, it was not difficult to tell that this existence had definitely been restrained, and that was why such a scene had appeared. Thinking of this, their spirits were lifted. Priest Shunchang did not forget to remind them, "Fellow Taoist Xianyuan seems to have gained the upper hand, but we have to be careful as well. We can't let this advantageous situation crumble in our hands." Everyone responded in agreement. Taoist Rendu was shocked. He sent a message to Taoist Towering Firmament and said, "Fellow Taoist, is that being suppressed?" Taoist Skirich pondered for a moment, then said, "It's really hard to say until the end. If we can really suppress this one, it'll be a good thing for us. Unfortunately, I'm afraid it won't be that easy." Rendu said, "What do you mean?" Taoist Skirich chuckled and said, "That person's background is far too complicated. Even when I peered into the heavenly secrets that day, I didn't dare to look too deeply into it. It's best if you and I don't know too much and try to stay as far away from it as possible. Whatever that person needs me to do, I'll do. There's no need to think too much about it." Rendu seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became a little more cautious. He didn't ask any more questions. Zhang Yan controlled the Qinghong sword pill to and fro in the murky darkness. As the swordsmanship became more and more perfect, the magic power it carried also became more and more smooth. After repeated refinement of the magic power on both sides, the refinement of the sword pill was only lacking a little bit of mastery. When the Taoist saw this, he still didn't use the third sword and let him continue refining it. This was not only to help Zhang Yan, but also because once the Qinghong sword pill was formed, the lethality it could cause would no longer be comparable to before. When the time came, they would definitely be able to heavily injure that being. It would be useful for both themselves and others. After an unknown period of time, Zhang Yan felt his aura shake. He felt that some kind of transformation was happening. He immediately summoned the Qinghong sword pill, and in an instant, it leaped to his side. At this moment, it was as if everything in the world had stopped moving. He looked up and saw a sword pill floating there. It glowed with flowing lights and vibrant colors, and an extremely fine 5-colored crystal condensed in the center. This sword not only appeared in front of him, but also appeared in his divine decree. Not only that, even the several clones he left in the 4 regions could see it, and each of them could be said to be the sword pill itself. This was because after this item was refined, it had also transcended the restraints of the present world, and its aura resonated with each other. As long as he thought about it, it would naturally appear by his side. And this sword had absorbed the essence of creation, so it could be called a treasure of creation. No matter if it was his spiritual power or the creation Weili, it could easily bear it. It was only compared to a supreme treasure of creation like the Tai Golden Pearl. However, this item could still continue to be nurtured. Logically speaking, as long as his cultivation had not reached the end, then this item could continue to improve, and its upper limit was much higher than ordinary supreme treasures of creation. He flicked his finger, and a clanging sword hum appeared on it. It was excited, and it caused a surge of fighting spirit to rise in his heart. He pressed his fingers together and pointed, and the sword pill turned into countless traces of light that instantly leaped into the darkness. When the Taoist saw this, he knew that he had already refined the sword, so he didn't wait any longer. With a wave of his sleeve, he swung the last sword, and a thin stream of light instantly entered the evil aura in front of him. However, at this moment, there was a force mixed in for no reason. No one knew where it came from, but it actually forced the sword to deviate slightly, and it didn't reach perfection. However, this sword strike had descended in the end, and the might left behind by the second sword strike was immediately drawn out. That existence was originally controlled by a single god, yet now it was slashed apart, and the mighty force of malice that suffused the void collapsed with a bang. The few gods seemed to be hostile to each other. They each withdrew a part of their Weili, and then they retreated one after another. For a moment, all the evil aura disappeared completely, and the silence immediately became empty. The scene of collapse from before was no longer there. The Taoist looked into the depths of the silence and said, "Although it's heaven-defying, it's still one move away, and it's not perfect." Although he said this, his voice was very calm, and it didn't sound like there was much regret in it. Zhang Yan had seen it very clearly just now. After being interfered with by that unknown power, although that existence was separated, it was divided into 3, 1 strong and 2 weak. It was not 3 people of equal strength, so the result was very different. However, in the end, that existence was still forced back. He smiled and said, "It's already not bad to be able to have such an outcome." He pondered for a moment and said, "Just now, that force is," the Taoist said, "since fellow Taoist has already thought of it, then there's no need to mention it. We can just leave it for the future to deal with it." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Originally, he had thought that it would already be pretty good if he could delay that existence. However, the current situation had already exceeded his original expectations. Although that existence had only temporarily retreated, and the strongest body that was killed still retained a large portion of that existence's power. Even if it was not a match for them, it still had the ability to seize everything. But no matter what, they could finally take a breather now. When they went back and digested the results of this battle, their cultivation would increase. Because that existence's Weili disappeared, Xin Chang, Qing Sheng and the others were no longer blocked outside, and their figures appeared once again. When they noticed that the existence had disappeared, they were also amazed. and a trace of respect unknowingly appeared in their gazes when they looked at Zhang Yan. To be honest, before coming out, even though everyone seemed to be in high spirits on the surface, they were actually not optimistic about this in their hearts. They only wanted to fight and delay that existence from devouring all forces, so they retreated to defend. But who would have thought that they would actually be able to expel that existence this time? Not to mention that the crisis had been resolved, everyone had also seen many things from the confrontation there. Although seeking help from others were two different paths, the principles of Tao were the same, and it could be said that everyone had gained something. Zhang Yan turned around and was about to speak to the others when he suddenly felt something. He turned around and saw a Taoist walking over. He also recognized him as Yao Han Jinren, and his eyes unconsciously moved. Yao Han Jinren arrived in front of the two in a few steps. He cupped his hands and then looked at the Taoist holding the sword, saying, "Fellow Taoist, we meet again." The Taoist said, "I know that person, but it's not you." Yao Han Jinren smiled, "It's just me." He paused for a moment, then said, "Although that existence has been expelled by the two of you, he will return one day. I found a place to seek shelter. Why don't fellow Taoist come to stay with me for a while, and we can discuss Tao in our free time?" The Taoist immediately rejected, "No need, I only like peace and quiet." As soon as he finished speaking, he nodded to Zhang Yan before his figure turned around and vanished without a trace. He left in an extremely agile manner. Yao Han Jinren did not mind. He looked around and saw that Can Shao, Xian Che, and Rendu did not fit in with the others, and immediately knew that they were not on the same side as Zhang Yan. Perhaps they were only here to fight against that existence, so he said, "My place of refuge is not much weaker than fellow Taoist Xuanyuan's Bu Su Tian. If fellow Taoists are interested, why don't you come to my place?" He then nodded, looked at Zhang Yan and said, "I wonder if fellow Taoist is willing?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "I previously promised these people that if they managed to expel or suppress that existence, I would let them go. Although it was not a complete success, it could be said that they have chased that existence away. If these people are willing to leave, I will not stop them." Xian Che, Can Shao, and the others were all scheming people, and they were not willing to be ordered around by others. If Yao Han Jinren was willing to take them in, it would be for the best. As for putting these three people into eternal silence, there was no need to do so. Even if he did not promise them before, as long as that existence was still around, these people were still part of the fight against that existence. Letting them go was better than suppressing them. Even if he had to fight against that existence in the future, there was no need to be afraid. Back then, he was already able to capture that existence, and now that his cultivation was higher, it would not be difficult to do so. Chapter 2070. Taoist Skyscraper was a little tempted by Yao Han's invitation. Even if he regained his freedom after he returned, Zhang Yan had just repelled that existence. Not only was his reputation flourishing, but his transcendence energy would also increase by a level. It was already impossible for him to have the idea of creating a land of transformation. Instead of being a lowly disciple under the ladder, he might as well change to another realm. Who knows, he might have a chance there. However, he couldn't do it alone, so he looked at Taoist Xian Che and asked, "What do you think, fellow Taoist?" Taoist Xian Che thought about it carefully. If he hid in Busha Heaven, he would never be able to show his face again. Moreover, as the great underworld patriarch's direct disciple, there was no way he would submit to Zhang Yan. The land of blessing in the four realms already had an owner, and he couldn't take it back. Perhaps going to the outside world was also an option. He actually had the same thoughts as Taoist Skyscraper, and because he could use the great underworld patriarch's Weili, as long as the conditions allowed, it was possible for him to turn the tables on Busha Heaven. His only concern now was whether the land of blessing was really comparable to Busha Heaven as Taoist Xian Che said. If it was just an ordinary land of blessing, it wouldn't be worth his effort. Taoist Yao Han saw through their thoughts and said with a smile, "Don't worry, fellow Taoists. What I said just now is true. Even if the battle outside is fierce, the land of blessing behind us isn't affected in the slightest. Taoist Skyscraper and Taoist Xian Che exchanged a few words with each other, and after confirming their decision he said, "All right, fellow Taoist Ren and I are willing to go with you." Taoist Xian Che nodded and said, "I'll go with you as well." Then he raised his hand and bowed. "I'll be counting on you to take care of us when the time comes." Taoist Yao Han bowed back politely and said, "You're too kind. Fellow Taoists and I will welcome you with open arms if you come to my place." After speaking to the two of them, he turned around and bowed to Zhang Yan. With a serious expression, he said, "I have a few words to say to fellow Taoist. I was asked by someone to say a few words." Zhang Yan knew that his sudden appearance this time was not just for these people, so he said, "Please speak." Taoist Yao Han said, "Fellow Taoist, you've forced that existence to retreat and split your primordial spirit into 3 parts. This is indeed a meritorious deed, but in reality, it cannot stop him from invading all things. It can only delay him. I'm sure it's not hard for fellow Taoists to understand this. Zhang Yan, I also have a rough idea of this person's background. I didn't expect to do anything to him, but since I was able to drive that person away once, it's not like I can't do it again in the future." Taoist Yao Han nodded and said, "If it's a fellow Taoist, there is indeed a possibility of such a thing. That fellow Taoist wishes to tell fellow Taoist to stop here. If you really want to stop this person in the future, you might as well stop your cultivation here. Don't pursue a higher realm, or else that person will only recover faster." Zhang Yan snorted coldly and said, "Fellow Taoist can reply to him. What does I's cultivation have to do with him? If he feels that it's inappropriate, he can come and argue with me personally." Just now, he clearly saw that Taoist Yao Han had also walked out of the mirror lake. The fellow Taoist he spoke of was most likely the faceless Taoist. Even if it wasn't, it should be related to him. He had experienced the conservatism of this person before. He didn't dare to stop that existence, but insisted on forcing him to retreat. In other words, he was just bullying the weak. If he had the ability to destroy this person at any time, would this person dare to say a word? Taoist Yao Han laughed and said, "I'm only responsible for bringing this message. This fellow Taoist's words are not my intention. However, I have something to ask fellow Taoist. What do you think about that existence's 2 doppelgangers?" Zhang Yan looked at him and smiled faintly. "Oh? What does fellow Taoist think?" Taoist Yao Han said, "I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. Just now, when I left the place of protection, one of the doppelgangers asked me for protection, but I rejected it." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "I wouldn't do that either. That existence's strongest remaining doppelganger could be called the Yuan body. Compared to the original, its strength was indeed much weaker. It definitely wanted to devour the doppelganger that had been cut out, so that it could return to its peak. If it was his idea, not only could these 2 doppelgangers not suppress it, but they would also have to find a way to help it escape the Yuan body's pursuit. However, it was impossible for him to seek shelter in Bu Su Tian's territory. He wasn't afraid of the existence's Yuan master god. With its current strength, it couldn't do anything to him. Even if the Taoist wasn't here, he would still dare to go out and fight it. However, no matter how strong the doppelgangers were, they still had the ability to devour everything. They were also a threat to all beings. If he let them in, he would be opening the door to a thief. Taoist Yao Han agreed, but then he asked, "What if someone did that?" Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. Anyone who possessed a blessed land should understand this logic. However, there were some things that wouldn't happen just because you thought it wouldn't happen. He said, "I'll naturally try to persuade him. If I can't persuade him, I'll have no choice but to stop him." Taoist Yao Han smiled deeply and said, "I hope fellow Taoist will remember what you said today." Zhang Yan then said, "I see fellow Taoist just now, you came out from the mirror lake." Taoist Yao Han smiled and said, "If fellow Taoist has the time, why not come over for a chat? Let me be the host." Zhang Yan glanced at him and said, "If I have the time, I will come and visit." Taoist Yao Han nodded and said, "Then I will bid farewell to fellow Taoist." After that, he left with Towering Sky and the others. In a flash, their figures disappeared into the mirror lake. Zhang Yan looked at the boundary and a few thoughts flashed through his mind. After a while, he turned around and asked, "Now that that existence has left, where will you all go?" Taoist Xinchang bowed and said, "I'm afraid we will have to trouble fellow Taoist for a while." Taoist Qing Xing didn't hesitate and said, "As long as that existence hasn't been completely eliminated, then we can only rely on you for protection." The others nodded subconsciously. Although that existence had been chased away and there didn't seem to be any danger in the void, it was only a temporary retreat. It wasn't really suppressed. The original body still retained most of that existence's power. Even if it couldn't defeat them now, it still had the ability to seize everything. Moreover, they had a part in chasing that existence away. If they left the place of protection and the existence came looking for them, it wouldn't be a good thing. However, cultivating in the land of creation was different. They didn't have to worry about the future, and there were people of the same path to spar with. It was many times better than in the void. Seeing this, Zhang Yan smiled and turned the creation Weili to bring everyone back to Busha Heaven. In a flash, they landed in the meeting hall. After giving some instructions, he let everyone go. He left a clone here to look after them while his main body prepared to go back and digest the results of this battle. After Quan Dao and Qing Sheng left the hall, they returned to their own base. When they sat down, Luan Fang sneered, "Yao Han, you didn't do anything and didn't come out to fight against that existence. But now you've come out." Bing Kong said, "Let him be. As long as he doesn't bother me after we find the fragment of creation, it'll be fine." Luan Fang said, "That's impossible. Previously, he was afraid of that existence's power and didn't dare to do such a thing. But now, he doesn't have to worry so much." What he was unhappy about was that they followed Zhang Yan and worked hard to defeat that existence. But now, they let Yao Han, who didn't do anything, take advantage of it. Bing Kong said, "Are you worried about Can Shen and the others?" Luan Fang said, "That's right. Yao Han and the others are already a cut above me. Now that they have the help of these three, if we continue to fight, how can the two of us win against them?" Bing Kong thought for a while and said, "It's not that we don't have help. If we have Dao friend Qing Sheng's help, we don't have to be afraid of him." Luan Fang said, "In my opinion, if we have Dao friend Xuanyuan's help, how would he dare to fight against me? Even if that doesn't work, we can still invite Dao friend Xinchang and the others to help us." Bing Kong shook his head and said, "We have to give up a lot of face for this. Now that we have Dao friend Xinshu's place of creation, we might as well look for more treasured embryos. This way, we won't have to fight with them every time." Luan Fang said, "We have to look for treasured embryos, but we can't let go of the fragment of creation. Otherwise, won't we look like we're easy to bully?" Bing Kong pondered for a moment and finally said, "That's fine too. Let's pay a visit to our fellow Taoist's place later." At the same time, Chen Shu invited Xinchang, Zhan Yuan, and the others to be guests at her place of creation. Ever since she went to the human world, she would visit the place from time to time. Every time she came back, she would taste the tea in her human form to calm her mind. Now, she was serving the tea with her own body. After Xinchang tasted the tea, he smiled and said, "Dao friend, your state of mind is much more stable than before." Chen Shu thanked him. As she fought against that existence, she saw many profound theories. Due to her cultivation, she couldn't understand them clearly, so she asked the other two for guidance. Shen Chang and Zhan Yuan answered patiently, and at the same time, they verified each other's knowledge. After a round of discussion, Chen Shu felt that she had learned a lot. She suddenly thought of something and said, "I have something to ask. Dao friend Shen Yuan, if you let Sky Reaching and the others leave, will it be disadvantageous to my place?" Taoist Shen Chang said, "Dao friend, do you intend to leave as well?" Chen Shu shook her head and said, "Just now is the best time to cultivate with my fellow Taoists. If he wanted to find the treasured embryos, he couldn't do it alone. It would be easier to find it with others. What's more, even if that existence didn't devour everything, it didn't mean that no one would covet the place behind her. It was better to stay under Zhang Yan's protection. At least, she wouldn't have to worry about people coming to provoke her." Taoist Shen Chang smiled and said, "Then it's fine. Let them go. They have deep thoughts, so it's not a good thing for them to stay in the inner realm. Even if they know where you are, as long as they are careful when searching for the treasured embryos, they will be fine. Chapter 2071. After Zhang Yan returned to the Qinghuan Palace, he sat down on the jade platform. He had obtained a lot of things from the battle, but some of them were deliberately distorted by that existence and needed to be stripped away. The rest were useful to him just now. As long as he could understand and comprehend these things, he could turn them into his own and become resources to improve his cultivation. After going through all these in the divine decree, his qi activity gradually rose. This meant that he had resolved more unknowns. He had sorted out most of them, but he still couldn't grasp the last few things, so he could solve them later. But the Great Way was endless. Every time you opened a door and thought that you understood the truth, you found that there was a wider world behind you. So, as long as you hadn't found the limit of the Tao, the third realm was almost an untouchable realm. But this didn't mean that there was no way. After digesting what he had obtained from the battle, he had an idea. Because of the lack of conditions, he couldn't achieve it for the time being, so he could only leave it for later. He looked up and found that after he had reached the step, it seemed that crossing those chaotic domains was no longer a difficult thing. Especially one of them, which seemed to be related to the qi of the Taoist who held the sword. Perhaps it was left here by that person. If he wanted to find it now, it would be very easy. He calculated that it wouldn't be long before this chaotic domain was close to Bu Shutian. If he were to force his way in, it would inevitably cause a disturbance, but it wasn't necessary. Judging from the Taoist's personality, he didn't care about anything other than his own Tao. Thus, this place wouldn't be a problem. Once it was connected to Bu Shutian, it would be fine. But the other places were a little more troublesome. He felt that there was a connection between this place and some mighty force. If he went there or forcefully barged in, he would definitely cause some trouble. He was not afraid of this, but that existence had just been expelled, so some things could wait for a while. When the time came, these forces would be wiped out one by one sooner or later. After making up his mind, he put this matter aside for the time being. Next, he deduced the sword sacrifice method from that Taoist and sorted out a set of methods. Originally, the method of offering sacrifices to the sword and nurturing the sword was deduced from a single place of fortune. But now, he had an entire 4 places of fortune under his rule. It was even to the extent that it wasn't impossible for him to borrow Chen Shu's place of fortune when necessary. With so many places of creation in hand, he didn't think that the sword nourishing method needed to be so conservative. With a flick of his sleeve, he threw the Qinghong sword pill into Bu Shutian. If he could successfully seize the essence of the creation treasure in the next era, then on the day the Qinghong sword pill was formed, its quality would not be weaker than the Tai golden bead. In another place of fortune, after Chen Shu, Shen Chang, and Zhai Yuan discussed Tao, they found that there were still some problems that they could not solve. This was the limit of their cultivation. Taoist Zhan Yuan sighed. Taoist Zhan Yuan Dao. Chen Shu said, "Then I'll have to ask you if there's a chance." Taoist Shen Chang said, "We've been bothering you for a long time. It's time for us to say goodbye." Chen Shu said, "Please wait." With a wave of her hand, she took out 2 pieces of profound jade and placed them in front of the 2 of them. Then she said, "Fellow Taoists, thank you for dispelling my doubts this time. I can't thank you enough, so I'll give these 2 things to you." Taoist Xinchang glanced at it and said with surprise, "Zhou Huanyuan jade?" Taoist Zhan Yuan looked at it and was also slightly surprised. He said, "It's indeed Zhou Huanyuan jade." He looked at Chen Shu. If a Taoist cultivator in the present world gets his hands on this item, he'll have a great fortune. Do you really want to give it to us? Chen Shu waved her hand and said indifferently, "This item is useless to me. It's best if you like it." One of the 2 profound stones was found in the realm. She didn't know if it originally existed in the realm or if Shi Liang had obtained it from somewhere else. She didn't see the origin of this item in her memories. Clearly, Shi Liang didn't take it seriously. As for the other one, it was born recently. She was a creation treasure spirit, so she wasn't interested in the treasures in the realm as long as they weren't at her level. If it weren't for the fact that she often went to the human world to hone her mental state, she wouldn't have paid attention to it at all. Taoist Shunchang thought for a while and said, Taoist Chen Shu, I think you might as well give this to Taoist Xian Yuan. Chen Shu was stunned and asked in confusion, why? With Taoist Xuanyuan's cultivation, would he be interested in this kind of thing? Taoist Shunchang smiled and said, this item's only use is to help lower realm cultivators enter the true yang realm. But we don't have any disciples, so it's useless even if we accept it. Taoist Xian Yuan is different. With Bu Xiutian around, the present world has always existed, so it's easy to imagine that there are still descendants of his disciples and even fellow Taoists around. Maybe some of them can use this item. Why don't you give it to him as a favor? Even if it doesn't work out, you can use it as an excuse to ask Taoist Xian Yuan for some guidance. Chen Shu's eyes brightened. If she could really make a good impression on Zhang Yan, it would undoubtedly be of great benefit to her. She said, then I'll do as you say. She then added, but I'll pay you a visit another day to thank you for your help today. Shunchang smiled and said, Taoist Xian Yuan, you don't have to be so polite. We've also benefited a lot from you. We're just helping each other out, so there's no need to thank us. Chen Shu still insisted. After sending Shunchang and Zhai Yuan away, she made some arrangements. Then, she sent a doppelganger through the door of the chaotic domain to Bu Su Tian. Then, she went to the meeting hall. When she arrived at the door, she saw Luan Fang and Bing Kong coming out. She immediately greeted them. Luan Fang and Bing Kong were also very polite to her and returned the greeting. Luan Fang even said, I don't want to see Taoist Chen Shu here. I wonder if it's convenient for you? We have something to discuss with you. Chen Shu thought that she still needed to rely on the two to find the treasure embryo, so she needed to build a good relationship with them. She said, I have something to ask Taoist Xian Yuan. I'll be free later. Luan Fang revealed a smile and said, then it's settled. We'll talk about it later. Chen Shu bid farewell to the two and walked into the hall. When she entered the hall, she bowed and said, Greetings, Taoist Xian Yuan. Zhang Yan returned the bow and invited her to take a seat. He then asked, Taoist Xian Yuan, what brings you here today? Chen Shu said, I have some questions about Tao that I'd like to ask Taoist Xian Yuan. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Now that he had reached the second layer, it wasn't strange for others to come and ask him for advice. However, Chen Shu's Tao was external. Even if they saw many Tao truths, if they weren't in a hurry, they wouldn't come and ask him. He thought for a while and realized that it was just an excuse. She must have come for something else. He smiled and said, if Taoist Xian Yuan has something to say, just say it. Chen Shu was a bit embarrassed and said, I have 2 Zhou Huanyuan jades in my realm. Because I don't pass them on to my sect and don't accept disciples, they're just like pearls covered in dust. I want to give them to you. Zhou Huanyuan jade, Zhang Yan was surprised. He hadn't expected Chen Shu to give him something like this. This was a pleasant surprise. In the mountain and sea realm, there were some cultivators who had reached a certain level of cultivation but were unable to improve. It was because they lacked this item that they encountered the same predicament as in the 9 continents. It wasn't that they didn't have enough talent, it was that they were limited by external objects. However, the conditions for the birth of the origin jade were extremely harsh. Even in Bu Su heaven, karma had to be stirred to bring it into the world. In the 3 realms of good fortune, only 1 origin jade had been produced. He didn't know if it would be produced again in the future. But even if it did, it would be for the sects of Qing Qin, Fu Li, and Ji Yuan. He wouldn't rashly take it. But this time, there were 2 origin jades in front of him. If they were lucky, they might be able to help the 2 of them enter the true Yang realm. Although a cultivator of that realm was nothing to him, because of Bu Su Tian, the world behind him would never be destroyed, so the possibilities were limitless. He said, Fellow Taoist, you're too kind. I will accept these 2 items. Chen Shu was delighted. Using 2 items that were useless to her in exchange for a favor from Zhang Yan was definitely worth it. She said, if fellow Taoist Xian Yuan doesn't mind my gifts being light, I'm glad. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since fellow Taoist just now you're asking about Taoist magic, I won't let you go empty-handed." He flicked his finger, and a golden leaf talisman floated down and landed in front of Chen Shu. "Fellow Taoist Xian Yuan, take it back and study it. You'll definitely learn something." Chen Shu thanked him and took it. She thought about it and was surprised to find that the logic she had been searching for could be solved here. She couldn't help but admire him. Because she was eager to study the mysteries within, she said, "Thank you for the magic, fellow Taoist. I'll take my leave now." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and ordered the formation spirit to send her out. Then he looked at the 2 origin jades. After a moment's thought, he decided on the ownership of these items. Because only cultivators who had severed their past and future bodies could use these items, there were only a few people who could obtain them. One of them could be given to the Shaoqing sect. After all, during the Battle of the Human Tribulation, the Shaoqing and Qinsong sects had joined forces to defeat the other sections. After that, when they came to the Mountain and Sea realm, it was the mortal metamorphosis cultivators from both sects who had worked together. Putting all of that aside, the person who he suspected to be the founder of the Shaoqing sect had fought shoulder to shoulder with him. Not only had he given him the sword sacrifice technique, but he had also helped him create the pure swan sword sphere. No matter what, he had to return this favor. As for the other one, he had already made arrangements. After thinking things through, he flicked his sleeve, and the 2 Zhou Huanyuan jades disappeared. In the blink of an eye, they appeared in the hands of his clone who was stationed in the Mountain and Sea realm. Chapter 2072. Mountain and Sea Realm, Duzhen Temple. Zhang Yan's clone opened his eyes and looked at the 2 Zhou Huanyuan jades on the table. After a moment's thought, he pointed at them, and a layer of light surrounded them. Normally, it was difficult to use magic to restrain them, but in the hands of an almighty spirit refinement expert like him, it was not difficult. With a thought, he saw a flash of light, and the mountain river child appeared. He bowed and said, "Greetings, master." Zhang Yan said, "Take my token and deliver it to the Upper Pole Temple and Daylight Temple. Personally deliver it to Deputy Temple Master Qi and Temple Master Hua. Come back after they've seen it." He could decide who he wanted to give it to, and no one would dare to say anything. However, as Temple Master Du Zhen of Qinsong School, he had to inform the sect about this. If the Mountain and Sea realm gained another almighty true Yang expert, it would definitely cause a change in the power structure of the sections. Since Sect Master Qin was in secluded meditation, the other 2 temple masters had the right to know about this. The Mountain River Child said, then left with the 2 talismans. Zhang Yan looked at the remaining profound stone, which he planned to give to his eldest disciple, Lu Yin. If the first one was for public benefit, then this one was for private benefit. As a teacher, it was only natural for him to take care of his own disciples. In reality, the previous sect masters of the Yudsong sect were also more suitable. However, no matter which one it was given to, it would be favoring one and discriminating against the other. Secondly, this was a gift from Chen Shujin to him. It could be considered a personal item. If he gave it to his own disciple, no one would be able to say anything. Although Lu Yenyi had not yet cultivated to the 3rd stage, it was only a matter of time, so it was better to keep it for now. Not long after, Mountain River Boy returned and reported, "Master, the 2 hall masters know about it." Zhang Yan said, "Take my letter and go to the Shaoqing sect. Invite sect master you out for a chat." The Mountain River Child took the letter, then turned into a ray of light and flew away. After Zhang Yan sat silently for a moment, with just a thought, a strand of consciousness incarnation had already arrived at the chaotic magnetic heavenly chasm outside the Western Absolute Domain. With a wave of his sleeve, he created a spiritual peak platform and sat down. Not long after, clear light shined in front of him. Then, Shaoqing sect master Yu Xianshao walked out and bowed. "Temple master Zhang Yan greets you." Zhang Yan got up and bowed. "Sect master Yu Xianshao greets you." He smiled. "Yu Xianshao. Sect Yan greets you." Both of them sat down at the table. In the next moment, a crack opened up on the peak, and crushed stones rustled as they fell down. Two jade cups that seemed to be made by the heavens descended and landed on the table. Then wind and clouds rolled over, and a sweet rain descended from the heavens. It converged into the cups, and in an instant, it condensed into 2 cups of spiritual tea that were steaming with mist. Yu Xianshao praised, "Creation is natural. Fellow Qi Tian Dao Dao Master Shui Longchen's cultivation is beyond our comprehension." Zhang Yan shook his head. "I'm just a step ahead of you." Yu Xianshao smiled. "Looks like Temple Master Zhang Yan invited me out today is related to my cultivation." Zhang Yan smiled. Sect Master Yu Xianshao said, "Sect Master Yu Xianshao knows the general trend. I invited you here today because I happen to obtain a Zhou Huanyuan jade. Considering the friendship between the Qinsong sect and the Shaoqing sect, I should entrust this item to your sect." As he spoke, he waved his sleeve, and a jade stone surrounded by light appeared on the table. Zhou Huanyuan jade? Yu Xianshao was also moved. Although Bu Su Tian only needed to stir up karma, and the profound stone would enter the world, and the sects would have a chance to obtain it, this matter was not fixed. The sects could only wait. But he didn't expect that this item would be delivered to him today. However, he didn't agree immediately. Instead, he put on a serious expression and said solemnly, "May I ask if you gave this item to me in private, or did your sect entrust it to my Shaoqing sect?" If this origin jade in return was the intention of the entire Qinsong school's higher-ups, then if he accepted it, it would mean that the Shaoqing sect owed Qinsong school a great favor. As the Shaoqing sect's sect master, he could owe a favor to his fellow Taoists, but he would absolutely not allow his sect to owe a favor to his sect. Since the Shaoqing sect established itself, nothing like this had ever happened, so they naturally couldn't make an exception. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This origin jade was offered by a fellow Taoist, so it can be considered as a private gift from I. It has nothing to do with my sect." Yu Xianshao nodded and didn't say anything else. He put the profound stone away and bowed to Zhang Yan solemnly. He said, "Thank you, Temple Master Zhang." There was no need to mention the importance of the Zhou Huanyuan jade. Not only could it help him to reach the upper realm, but it was also of great significance to the entire sect. The Shaoqing sect's foundation was not much weaker than the Qinsong schools, and they had always thought that they wouldn't lose to any sect in the world. However, they were blocked by the Zhou Huanyuan jade. No matter how talented the cultivators in your sect were, they couldn't enter the true Yang realm without the origin jade. They clearly knew that the door to the Tao was there, but they couldn't pass it. Now, what was left for the disciples was only an upper limit that they could see, and there seemed to be no way forward. Logically speaking, this matter could be concealed, but the Shaoqing sect didn't do so. Instead, they told this to every cultivator in the sect who intended to climb the Tao. Some people knew that if they continued upwards, they would most likely touch a peak. Although they did not become depressed, it was inevitable that they would lose their drive. However, there were some who were unwavering and believed that as long as they severed their past and future bodies, they would obtain eternal life. Then, no matter how many years it took for the profound stone to appear, as long as they continued to wait, there would eventually be a chance. Now that Yu Xianshao had obtained the profound stone, he was confident that he could pass this test. As long as one person in the Shaoqing sect succeeded, it meant that this path was feasible and the younger generation could continue to advance. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You don't have to thank me, fellow Taoist. Our two sects have always worked together to fight against the enemy since the 9 continents. If it wasn't for that fellow Taoist's gift, if the next profound stone were to appear, it would have been given to your sect after we found it." Yu Xianshao shook his head and said, "We don't know how long it will be. Although we have eternal life, not everyone in the sect is like that. Many elders and disciples only hoped to see a true young great cultivator in the sect before they passed away. It's good that they can have some expectations now." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He could understand the thoughts of the disciples of the Shaoqing sect who hoped for the sect to become stronger. The Shaoqing sect had been on par with the Qinsong school for many years. Although other sects also compared the Qinsong school to the Shaoqing sect. In fact, because of his existence, the Qinsong school was far above the Shaoqing sect. This really stimulated many disciples of the Shaoqing sect to catch up. However, in his opinion, this was a good thing. The Qinsong school was the most powerful sect. In the long run, it would inevitably cause the disciples to become arrogant. As long as the upper echelons of the two sects controlled the situation well, it would be beneficial to both sides. Yu Xianshao pondered deeply for a moment and said, "Now that I obtained this origin jade, I'll enter into closed-door cultivation once I return. If the Kunshi continent obtains another origin jade, then my Shaoqing sect will withdraw from the competition." Zhang Yan nodded. Since the Qinsong sect and the Shaoqing sect didn't compete for this origin jade, it could be considered to be a good thing for all the sections. He said, "Then Sect Master Yu, if another origin jade appears in the world, which fellow Taoist from the Shaoqing sect is more suitable? Since the Shaoqing sect had taken the initiative to give up this fortune, it ought to be decided by the Shaoqing sect." Yu Xianshao thought about it for a moment, then said, "There's no need for me to decide. In a few years, there will be a sword duel between the various sects, and the origin jade can be given to the winner. That would be the fairest way." Zhang Yan smiled. Yu Xuanxiao's suggestion would definitely cause all the sects to fight over it. However, he didn't oppose it. The mountain and sea realm was now rich in spiritual opportunity. Furthermore, the Kunshi continent had endless resources. Although the sects of the 9 continents were far more powerful than they had been in the past, they still lacked the will to fight. If the origin jade was given as a reward, then the calm waters of the mountain and sea realm would definitely be stirred up. Now that he had come to the proper business, he said a few more words and then bid farewell to Yu Xianshao. As for the person he suspected to be the founder of the Shaoqing sect, he didn't mention anything to him. If that person didn't want to show himself, then he must have his own reasons, so there was no need for him to get involved. Thinking about it, he returned to the Temple of Truth and sat down. Suddenly, his heart trembled, as if he had sensed something. He immediately made some calculations and discovered that in the future, there were many karmic traces of heaven's workings that would fall upon the mountain and sea realm. Furthermore, it wasn't just the mountain and sea realm, but all the other heavens and realms. Sensing that something was amiss, he focused his mind and began to calculate. In an instant, his mind leaped out of the present world, and he looked down from a high vantage point. After a while, he opened his eyes again, and they glowed faintly. Just now, he discovered that it wasn't just the present world in front of him. Even the 3 realms of good fortune, as well as the present world behind Shinshu, were experiencing the same thing. Perhaps all of the realms of good fortune in the present world were experiencing the same thing. This matter seemed to be very unusual. He thought to himself, could it be that the aura of the heavens and earth has been devoured? That's possible. Countless present worlds and quite a bit of the essence of good fortune had been devoured by that being. In fact, the magical power of many soul-tempering cultivators in the void had been swept away by that being. Now that that being was gone, it would definitely affect the heavens and lead to something like this happening. But he still had the feeling that things weren't so simple. He continued to calculate, but this time, after the spiritual opportunity had flourished, the workings of heaven were obscure, and he couldn't see anything. Everything in the world, with the exception of the almighty soul-tempering cultivators who had transcended the present world, usually experienced ups and downs. But after the spiritual opportunity had flourished, there was no sign of decline. Instead, it was chaotic and difficult to understand. There was definitely something wrong with that. Only an almighty cultivator could cause something like this to happen. But who could possibly be capable of such a thing? Even as he was calculating, a Taoist with an indistinct face was standing in the void. The ripples of magical power were spreading out to countless other present worlds, but when they reached Bu Su Tian, they were easily neutralized by a Weili. Although they couldn't penetrate into the void, they were still able to cause a disturbance in the workings of the heavens. Chapter 2073. Zhang Yan continuously deduced many times, and was more or less able to confirm his previous judgment. Although the great prosperity this time had the operation of the heavens, it was also pushed by some people. However, he still couldn't figure out the purpose of doing this, and could only faintly feel that it should be related to the matter of that existence retreating. Based on what Taoist Faceless had done last time, it seemed likely that he and the sword-bearing Taoist weren't doing as they wished. If that was the case, then it was entirely possible that they would try to pull some tricks. After some thought, he came to the conclusion that although this wasn't an actual battle, it was still a game. The only difference was that the two sides weren't going to meet face to face, which was also a test of their abilities. Since the worlds were about to usher in a great rise, then he might as well push the boat along with the current. He wasn't going to do anything to stop it. After all, was he really worried that more upper realm cultivators would appear? Soul refinement cultivators hoped to have more fellow Taoists. That way, they would be able to make progress in their Taoist magics. Since the workings of the heavens were leaning toward this matter, then he might as well go along. Even if someone wanted to do something, he would wait and see how the situation played out before making a decision. In the mountain and sea realm, in the western sky badlands, in the crane lofty continent, in the soaring star sect. The soaring star sect was a sect that had only risen to prominence 100 years ago. It was founded by a dozen or so rogue cultivators, as well as several cultivators from the Taoist sect who had been pushed out. The mountain and sea realm was vast and boundless, and the western sky badlands were filled with countless demons, devils, and outsiders. However, ever since the Shaoqing sect established itself on Mount Shockwave, they had wiped out all of the greater demons and monsters. Most of the remaining demons and monsters had gone into hiding and didn't dare to show their faces. Therefore, many unorthodox cultivators from other continents had come to the western sky badlands to establish their sect. The Shaoqing sect didn't care what sect you were from. As long as you were willing to fight outsiders and demons and devils, they would allow you to establish your sect. Although the techniques of these sects weren't of the highest quality, any sect that could survive for so long was no slouch in battle. The Soaring Star sect had been absorbing and annexing other sects over the past few decades. Furthermore, the sect happened to be located in a valley that was filled with abundant spirit qi, as well as an enormous catacomb with a spirit spring. More than a dozen Yuanine cultivators had emerged from the sect, making it one of the most powerful unorthodox sects in the southwest. At this point, if there was another Grotto Heaven cultivator in the sect, it was very likely that the sect would become one of the big sections. Inside a stone room on the mountain wall of the sect, the core formation disciple Jiang Mingtang came out from his meditation. His eyebrows were tightly furrowed. Yesterday, he cultivated a technique from the sect. If he successfully cultivated this technique, he would be able to know the weaknesses of his body in his dreams. From there, he would be able to make up for it. This was also the most valuable secret technique of the Soaring Star faction. Although they could not cultivate superior techniques like the Xianmen disciples, they could use this technique to make up for their weaknesses. This way, their cultivation would not fall too far behind their peers from the big sections. But when he woke up today, he found that not only did he see the flaws in himself, but there were also many things in his mind. Not only were there all the secret techniques and tricks of the sect that he didn't know about, but everything that happened hundreds of years later was reflected in his mind. Although he had forgotten many things, he still remembered the more important ones, which made him really scared. Were these things real or fake? Or did someone want to do something to the sect? Did they purposely let him see these things? Assuming that it was fake, the person who knew how to do this should have a high cultivation level. It seemed like there was no need to plot against a junior who had just entered the core transformation realm. But there were some things that a powerful cultivator didn't need a reason to do. Perhaps they could do it on a whim. Of course, it was not impossible for him to directly go to the big sects to verify it. Nowadays, there were frequent exchanges between the various sections. Even if a disciple from a small sect took a detour, he could still be related to a big sect. Moreover, the Soaring Star faction had always considered itself to be a lower sect of the Shaoqing dynasty. With his position in the sect, it was really not difficult for him to ask for a solution. But he did not dare to do such a thing. If it really involved some powerful cultivator, unless he had the protection of an upper realm cultivator at all times, He would definitely not have a good ending. Moreover, he also had a thought. What if these were all opportunities that he obtained by chance when he was comprehending the technique? If this matter was spread out, just the fact that he knew all the techniques of the sect would be difficult to resolve. Just as he was pondering, he heard a voice outside the door. "Is Senior Martial Brother in?" Jiang Mingtang was startled. He heaved a sigh of relief and composed himself. "Is it Junior Martial Brother in? Please come in and talk." The curtain was lifted and light shone in from outside the door. A young cultivator walked in. He cupped his hands and asked, "Senior Martial Brother, how was your cultivation yesterday?" Jiang Mingtang sighed. "I was not able to fulfill my wish." The young cultivator consoled him. "Our sect's techniques are originally concise and deep in meaning. It is harder to comprehend. Senior Martial Brother, try it a few more times and I believe you will be able to gain some understanding." Jiang Mingtang casually agreed. He was very clear that the Soaring Star Faction's techniques were said to be concise and deep in meaning. In reality, it was because the techniques of the Soaring Star Faction were crude. They could only talk about it in general and could not explain all the principles. They could only rely on the disciples' own comprehension. However, the Soaring Star Faction's techniques were originally deduced by the current sect leader and a few elders by combining a portion of Xuanmen's techniques with unorthodox techniques. In order to compete with the other sects, they had no choice but to take an unorthodox path. Because of this, the possibility of chi deviation was also very high. He suspected that he had also encountered such an incident. It was just that his luck was better and he saw something that he should not have seen. He asked, "Junior Martial Brother, why are you here so early?" The young cultivator clapped his hands and said, "I almost forgot what I came here for. Just now, the Greater Sect has sent out news that within 2 or 3 years, there will be a grand tournament of the various sections. They want us to prepare." Jiang Mingtang's heart skipped a beat. This was the first thing he had experienced in the dreamscape. He also knew that the grand tournament would not only be held in the mountain and sea realm, but also against the cultivators of the Yuhuan heavens and other heavens. The scale of the tournament would be unprecedentedly large. However, the grand tournament would at most involve the Yuaning level. Cultivators of the celestial paradise could break through the barriers of heaven and earth, and were almighty beings who could travel through the void. At that level, they could be said to be on a completely different level from heaven and earth. Naturally, they would not participate in something like this. The young cultivator continued to speak excitedly. "Elder Brother's cultivation base is at least in the top 3 among your peers in the sect. If our Soaring Star School can get a place in the grand tournament of the grand tournament, Elder Brother might even have a chance to follow disciples of the great sects to the Kunchi continent. I've heard that there is boundless spiritual opportunity there, as well as countless foreign objects. If you cultivate there, your cultivation base will definitely improve quickly." Jiang Mingtang laughed. "The demons of the Kunchi continent are also incredible. 4 side sect disciples like me, it would be good if we could stay alive there. How could we possibly cultivate there?" The young cultivator laughed. "Elder Brother, your words don't match your heart again. If you had the chance, why wouldn't you go?" Jiang Mingtang was speechless. If he really could go to the Kunchi continent, he wouldn't care about such things. If everything in the dream was real, then he really did have a chance to go there. However, in the dream, someone had interfered and prevented him from going. He sighed inwardly. This junior martial brother of his couldn't see hundreds of years in the future. How could he have imagined that his thoughts would be even more daring? Jiang Mingtang felt that he knew too much, and his courage had become weaker. Just as they were talking, a young man came in from outside the door. He said respectfully, "2 senior martial brothers, Master has summoned you." The young cultivator said excitedly, "Senior martial brother, Master must have summoned us for the grand tournament." Jiang Mingtang said, "All right, I'll go with you." Their master was the sect's elder, spiritual master Mian. He was easygoing with his disciples and didn't restrain them at all. After calling the 2 of them in, he let them out. This time, it was indeed for the grand tournament. However, the sect didn't force them and only let them make their own choice. Obviously, the higher-ups of the sect also knew that although the Soaring Star School could compete with ordinary sects, it couldn't compare to the great sects of Xianmen. Hence, they didn't expect anything from their disciples. They just treated it as an opportunity to broaden their horizons. Jiang Mingtang came back and sat for an entire day. After thinking about it repeatedly, he still decided to go. Regardless of whether the things in his mind were done by an almighty being or not, since they were in his body, he couldn't escape. Hence, he might as well go with the flow. If everything he saw was real, then everything would be fine. If it was just an illusion, then it was all his own imagination. As for the more complicated situation, he didn't think about it anymore. He didn't even dare to think about it. He tried to recall. Perhaps it was because his cultivation wasn't refined enough. He forgot most of the details in his dream. He only roughly remembered that he was very lucky this time. He defeated many opponents of the same generation as him, and even received a few pointers from an almighty being. It was also because of this relationship that he obtained many benefits later on. This time, if he were to go back, he believed that he wouldn't be able to do better than he did in his dream. Hence, the first thing he needed to do was not to change too much, lest he lost his original luck. After he could preserve these, he would try to ask for more. Although the battle of magical powers would happen in a few years, it was time to prepare now. In particular, the sect needed to try to push the cultivation of the disciples as much as possible before the battle. Hence, in the next few days, any disciple who agreed to the battle of magical powers would have their cultivation pills and secret medicines covered by the sect. They would also be given many secret cultivation methods. Jiang Mingtang used this to confirm what he saw in his dream. After reading it, he was slightly excited. No matter what the future changes were, at least the cultivation methods and secret techniques he saw were real. However, he felt that it was a pity because he didn't need these now. In the hundreds of years in his dream, he successfully cultivated to the Yuanying realm. For the sake of the younger generation of disciples, he once found many superior cultivation methods. Although he couldn't remember many things clearly, the contents here were firmly remembered. Since there was an orthodox method to follow, there was no need to take such a radical, unorthodox path. He carefully cultivated according to the records of the cultivation method in his dream. In a flash, 2 years had passed. Although his cultivation didn't make much progress, the original flaws were filled up by him. His foundation was more stable than before. At this time, there was also confirmed news that the battle of magical powers between the sects would be in 2 years. The Ongxing faction attached great importance to this matter. For this reason, they sent 5 Yuanying elders. They brought along more than 30 core transformation disciples and more than 100 profound light disciples, including Jiang Mingtang. They boarded a flying ship and headed to the highest peak in the southwest, Mount Orchid. They were prepared to meet up with the many unorthodox sects of the Western Absolute Domain and head to the location of the Battle of Magical Powers together. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.